The men who came for me said I would be working with the food, and that was true, so I have never held it against them. That first morning, they gave me a bench under a window and a hill of root vegetables to my left, and I remember thinking that a man could live a long while in a room with light like that. Two of them stood by the door behind me with their heads together. They were arguing in the low voices people use in a house where sound carries. What they were arguing about was which knife was easier. I told them the short one, because the long one drags and you end up sawing. They stopped talking. I went back to the roots and felt good about having settled it. I am Ovin. I come from a valley 2 days east of anywhere, where the whole village lives off one leaf, and I was the boy they sent up the slope for it, because I was the only one who could find it in the dark. The carriage that fetched me had black lacquer and a crest I did not know, and inside it smelled of cold stone. I asked whether the kitchen was large. The man across from me looked out of the window for a while and then said it was very large. He gave me a room with a window, 3 sets of clothes, and more food in one evening than I had eaten in the month before it. I wrote to my mother that the bed was off the floor. There was nothing else worth writing yet. Sonatai. On the first night, a woman with a small spoon came in and tasted everything I had made. She waited with her eyes half shut and wrote something down. Then she looked at me the way you look at weather coming over a ridge. I told her she did not have to do that, since I had tasted it myself off the spoon. She said she absolutely did, and she said it the way other people say their own name. Her name was Nima, and she was the taster, which she explained as other people explain that they are left-handed. 9 times something had gone into her that was meant for somebody else, she said, and she had come back from all 9. And she said it without pride, as a fact about her constitution. Then she knocked her spoon twice against the rim of the bowl, which I would learn was how she finished a thought. She asked what I had put in the sauce. Onion, I said, and the fat off the top of yesterday. She wrote that down. I watched her eat cold food out of a bowl that had been standing since the pans came off the heat. From the next night, I would keep a small hot portion back for her. There is no sense in a person eating cold what everyone else eats warm. I stripped a leaf while she watched. I threw the blade of it in the slop pail and kept the pail middle, and she asked why I had thrown away the part with the flavor in it. At home we call the middle the heart of it, I said, because it is the one thing in it worth anything. She wrote that down too, under flavor, and neither of us thought about it again for a very long time. The kitchen senior was a broad man called Halden, who talked to his ovens more than he talked to people. He had put me on roots and sauces, and told me the house would explain the rest when the house was ready, and I said that suited me, and asked where the slop pail lived. They called me the remedy from the first day. I thought it was the name of the post, the way the steward is the steward, and the taster is the taster. Nobody corrected me for 11 weeks. 5 women come into this, and you are going to have to keep them apart in the dark, so take them by their sounds. Nima the taster knocks her spoon twice on the rim before she says anything worth hearing. Kes the general of the guard sets her vambrace down on wood the way other people sigh. Ilka, the queen's young sister, arrives everywhere behind the squeak of chalk on slate. Dova, a princess out of a neighboring house, thinks with her rings clicking against a cup. And the queen needs no sound at all, because the air in a room goes cold enough to show your breath before the door opens. The court physician came down to the kitchen before noon on that first day. He was called Vek. He was old in the way that stone is old, and he had a case of instruments he opened on my chopping block without asking anybody. He measured across my shoulders and down my forearm. He took hair from behind my ear and held it up against the window. He turned my wrist over and looked at the inside of it for longer than a man looks at a wrist. I stood still for all of it. I thought this was how a great house checks, that a new hand has nothing catching. When he was done, I asked whether he had eaten anything that morning. He said that was not the question in front of us. I said it was the question in front of me, since I had a pan going, and I put a plate down at his elbow with bread and the heel of the ham on it. Vek looked at the plate. Halden and 2 scullions had gone very quiet at the ovens. Then the physician closed his case, said something about returning when the light was better, and went up the stairs without touching the bread. Halden waited until the door shut and told me, without turning round, that the physician had not sat down to eat in that kitchen in 40 years. I said that explained the color of him. The scullion is called Alsa. She is 14, and she does the cold room. She discovered that something in the cold room needed checking, and she was in there a while, and when she came out, she had nothing in her hands. The number came at me sideways, over the bread. Halden said the physician had counted at dawn, and the answer had been 100, and he said it the way you report weather that is somebody else's problem. 100 what? I said. Halden said days. I asked whether that was until a feast, because a house this size would want extra hands for a feast, and I could do 100 days of roots standing on my head. Halden set the ladle down and said it was how long the queen had. Then he picked the ladle up again, because there is no good place to put a ladle down after a sentence like that. I get asked what I felt. What I did was put the ladle down and ask him what she had been eating, because a person who is going has usually stopped eating first, and that is a thing you can do something about. Halden said broth. I said for how long? He said since the spring, and I stood there working out that a woman I had never seen had been living on my trade for 2 seasons, and nobody had asked her what she wanted in it. The girl with the slate came at me an hour after that. 17, in good clothes she did not care about, chalk dust down one hip, and she wanted hair, and she wanted it from the crown and not the sides. I said she could have as much as she wanted and offered to cut a proper handful. She went still. People usually make a fuss, she said. I said hair grows back and asked whether she needed nails as well. Ilka wrote something on the slate with the chalk shrieking across it, and she wrote it twice because the first time her hand was not steady. She said her name was Ilka and that the house had given her a study to do. I said the house I came from gave people jobs too, so I understood. I thought the great houses kept a record on their staff, as a farm keeps a record on its animals, teeth, and wind, and what they can lift. I was not offended. In my valley, we would have done it if we could afford chalk. Late in the afternoon, a tray went up past me with a black glass cup on it, and the corridor it went into breathed out cold on my arms, and I asked Halden what the queen was having with it. Halden said nobody asks that. I said somebody should, since she has to swallow it, and then I asked what she likes, and Halden stood there, with his mouth open, like a man who has been handed a tool from another trade. The general came into my kitchen at the end of that first day, with her sleeve rolled and a face like a closed gate. She set her vambrace down on the block, and the sound of it going onto wood is the sound I still hear when somebody says her name. She wanted a rag and a bowl of water, and to be left alone. A cut across the inside of the forearm, at drill, from a blunt blade, and she told me it was blunt twice, because a blunt blade is not supposed to be an event. I gave her the rag, and then I did not leave her alone. A black line had already started up the inside of her arm towards the elbow, thin as a thread. I have seen that thread on a goat, and on my uncle, and once on a man who had no uncle to compare with. Sit down, I said. She said she outranked everyone in the room, including the ovens. I said the line up her arm did not know that, and it would be at her shoulder by morning, and I would rather argue with her now than carry her later. She sat down. Halden held the lamp. I opened the cut wider than she liked and cleaned out what was in it, and she did not make a sound the whole time, which I found more frightening than screaming would have been. Then I packed it with the pale middle of the leaf. I set water on for the bitter drink, the one everyone in my valley learns to make before they learn to read. Then I stood over her while she got it down. She asked me what it was. I said, it was what you drink. She said that was not an answer, and drank the rest of it anyway. And that is the whole of Kess in one exchange if you want to save time. She has 11 campaigns behind her. She told me that later, and not as a boast, only to explain why she thought a blunt blade was beneath her notice. Then she noticed me looking at the vambrace on the block, which had a crack running through the plate near the wrist. I said I could mend that. She said it was armor and I was a cook. I said it was a strap and a rivet and a split plate, and that I had mended a plow that mattered more to more people, and she left it with me without saying she was leaving it with me. The evening table in that house sits under a ceiling you cannot see the top of, and everyone has a place. And where your place is says everything the house thinks of you out loud without anybody having to be rude about it. I stood against the wall with a jug, which is where a new hand stands, and I was pleased to be in the room at all, and would have said so if anybody had asked me. Vec waited until the soup was down, and then said, in a voice that carried to the pillars, that the preparation was ready, and there was no reason on earth not to finish the business tonight. I did not know what business he meant. I refilled the cup nearest my hand, wondered whether the big pans had been scoured properly, and went on standing there like furniture that breathes. Then the far door opened, and the temperature went out of the room. I have been cold since in the mountains, and it is not the same cold, because mountain cold does not look at you. Iselle came in and sat, and 40 people stood up and sat down again with her, and she did not appear to notice that they had. Kess stood up. At the 11th hour, she said, in the flat voice officers keep for reports, I came into the lower kitchen with a blade cut and a black thread going up the inside of my arm, and this one opened it, cleaned it, packed it, and dosed me. He is a kitchen hand, and I am the general of this guard, she said. And by the code of the 6 houses, this house now owes him a life. A man in the middle of the table laughed once and found nobody laughing with him. The table came apart at once. 2 witnesses is not a finding, said a man in green. It is a kitchen anecdote. The general can hardly certify her own rescue, said somebody else. She is not qualified to say whether she was dying. Halden said he had held the lamp and had seen the thread at the elbow. Alsa, who had never spoken above a whisper in that hall, said she had seen it at the shoulder line by the time the water boiled, and then sat down very fast. The steward Orin came forward. He is a man built entirely out of protocol, and he settled the whole thing in the tone of somebody reading out an inventory of table linen. Under the code, a finding requires a witness who is not the debtor, said Orin. 2 such witnesses are present and in agreement. This house therefore stands owing the remedy a life. Vec had a spoon in his hand. He put it down flat, and he put both hands flat on the cloth beside it, and he did not eat anything else that evening. Every eye at the top of the table had a look at him doing it. I understood none of it, and I was delighted. I thought it was a house custom, like counting the guests before the doors are barred, and I thought being counted meant I had been taken on properly, and someone would tell my mother. So I asked the steward out loud, in front of everyone, whether the count included the guards standing outside in the cold, because it seemed hard on them to be left out. Orin considered this seriously for 4 seconds. The guards outside are not owed anything by anybody at present, he said, and thanked me for the question. Somewhere down the table, a woman put her face into her napkin. Then the queen spoke, and the room stopped as if a hand had gone over its mouth. Is the fat on the soup goose? She said. Mutton, I said, and I will do it with goose if you would rather. And what else do you like? There was a pause of a kind I did not understand at the time. Iselle said nobody had asked her that in 2 years. Then she ate the soup, all of it, which I learned much later was the first bowl she had finished since the spring. I was not in the corridor afterwards, and I have this from a woman who assumed I already knew, which is how I got most of what happened behind my back in that house. Vec caught the queen between the pillars. He can be taken quietly tonight, he said, with nobody the wiser and no finding entered anywhere. The finding is already entered, said Iselle. Entries can be slow, he said. The code is not an entry, she said. It is what the 6 houses are made out of. You have had 400 years to learn that, and I do not intend to teach it to you in a corridor. You will be dead in 100 days, he said. Then I will be dead in 100 days, she said, and went up, and by every account the cold went up the stairs with her. The rule I took out of my first day was the wrong rule, and I kept it for 11 weeks. Great houses like to be told what is in the sauce. I went back down and finished the pans, and set Nima's hot portion aside under a cloth for the next night, and put Kessa's vombrace on the sill where the light would catch the crack in the morning. Then I wrote to my mother. I told her the bed was off the floor, and that the kitchen was as large as they said, and that a woman with a spoon tastes everything before it goes up, which struck me as a wasteful way to run a house, but not my business. The steward came down before the lamps went out, because protocol required the finding to be entered where the kitchen could hear it, and he set it to the ovens and the pans and Alsa and me. The house stands, owing the remedy one life. The bell that wakes that house goes at first light, and it is not for prayers. It is so that everybody is standing in the great hall when the physician says the number. Vec came in with his sleeves down and his hands folded and said 99, and 40 people breathed out at once, and then went off to their work as if a price had been read at a market. I had come up with a jug because Halden told me the kitchen sends a jug. I stood there holding it and thought that 99 was a strange thing to shout at people before they have eaten. The steward found me in the corridor after and explained the protocol, since explaining protocol to somebody who is not asked is the great pleasure of his life. The physician counts at dawn. The physician says the number. The house hears the number and goes on. I asked Orin what happens when the number is small. He said the protocol for that had not been written yet, and he said it the way you would say that a door had not been painted, and then he went away to count napkins. Nima came down before the ovens were hot and found the plate I had kept back for her under a cloth, still warm, because I had banked the fire with that in mind. She stood there with it for a while. Who told you to do that? She said. Nobody, I said. It is only sense. You eat the same food as everyone else, and there is no reason it should be the coldest food in the house. Tasters eat cold, she said. Tasters in this kitchen eat hot, I said, and went back to the roots. And behind me, I heard her spoon go twice against the rim of the bowl. I did not see what she did with the rest of that morning, and I only know because the steward tells it, and he tells it as an irregularity in the record rather than as anything else. Nima went to Oren and asked whether a taster is permitted to keep a second list. A second list of what? He said. Of things I have eaten by choice, she said. There has never been such a list in this house, said Oren, because there has never been any call for one. There is a call for one now, she said, and took a fresh slate out of the store on her own authority, which is the only thing she has taken in 40 years. On the 5th day, Halden put me on the queen's tray, and he did it as you hand somebody a live bird. He stood over me for the first 2 evenings and made noises through his teeth. There is a black glass cup that goes up with every tray, and the physician fills it himself, and nobody but the physician touches it. That was made very clear to me. I have never touched it to this day. Everything else on the tray was mine. Broth, mostly, because she was not eating solid food, and a broth is nothing without greens in it. So I went to the store and found the barrels of pale leaf that come up from the south twice a year. I stripped them the way I have stripped them since I was 6. Blade in the pail, pale middles in the pot. There were 4 of us in the kitchen that evening, and not one of them looked up because it was kitchen greens, and men do not look up for greens. The queen's sister came at me twice a day now. Ilka had a slate, a choinchus ace, a choinchus soycane, a lamp she carried in daylight for no reason I could see, and a list of things she wanted off me that got stranger as the days went on. She wanted my breath in a cold jar. She wanted to know how long I slept and whether I dreamed and what of. She wanted a fingernail. She wanted to weigh me in the morning and again at night and be told what had gone in between. I gave her all of it. When she asked whether I minded, she looked at the floor while she asked, which I have since learned is what she does when the answer matters to her. I said that in my valley, a man who is worth studying is a man who has done something, and that I had done nothing but soup, so she was welcome to whatever she could find. She wrote that down, which surprised me, since it was not a measurement. By the end of that week, she had done 31 assays on me, and the slate had my name at the top of it, in a hand much neater than her speech. Then the 6th day happened, and it happened at the speed those things happen at, which is to say between one breath and the next, while 4 people are laughing about something else. I had done a dish with preserved plum in it, out of a crock from the back of the store. Nima took her spoonful the way she takes everything. She got the second mouthful halfway up and stopped. She put the spoon down carefully, because she is careful, and she said in an ordinary voice that this one was wrong, and then she went down on the flags like a dropped coat. The kitchen did what kitchens do, which is shout. Halden went for the physician. Somebody went for water, which was the worst thing to give her, and I took the cup out of his hand hard enough that he still brings it up. Her mouth had gone the color of the inside of a shell, and there was a smell off her breath like something turned in a warm room. I had smelled that exactly twice before, and both times it was a jar. In my valley, we eat 1 mushroom every autumn that is not quite safe, because it grows in quantity on the north side, and a family that will not eat it does not get through to spring, and every single autumn somebody gets it wrong. So every single autumn, somebody's grandmother sends a child up the wet bank behind the mill for the root that answers it, and the child is usually me, and by the time I was 9, I could find that root in a dark so thick I had to feel for the leaf shape with my thumb. Nobody in my valley thinks this is knowledge. It is a thing you do in October, like mending the byre. There was no wet bank behind that palace. There was a herb store the size of my mother's house. The root was in it, dried, in a drawer labeled in a hand nobody had read for a long time. At that court, it was thought to be for horses. I ground it with the flat of a knife and got it into her with warm water and my thumb on her jaw. Halden held her up. It took a long time. Then it stopped taking a long time, and she was sick down my front and started swearing. She swore for a full minute. It was extremely fluent, and it was mostly about the plum. Then she asked me what I had given her, and I said root. And she said, root is not a word, and I said in my valley it is the only word for it. Beck arrived at the run and stopped in the doorway and looked at her sitting up against the leg of the block, and something went across his face that I could not read then and can read now. He knelt and took her wrist and her eye and her breath. Then he said, without looking at me, that the work was right and she would keep, and he stood up and dusted his knees and left. He did not ask what it was. That is the thing I have thought about most since. A physician 4 centuries in his post walked out of a room without asking what had gone into a woman on his own floor, and it was not because he did not care. Tess opened a hunt that same night. She had the storeroom shut and every crock in it opened, and she stood over it herself until the small hours with a lamp, because a poisoning in the queen's kitchen is a matter for the guard. There was no poisoner. The crock at the back had gone over in the warm and had been going over for a season, and the seal had held just enough to hide it, and the man who should have turned the store had died in the spring, and nobody had been given the job after him. Kes came into the kitchen at 2 in the morning and put the bad crock on my block, and said that the entire guard of this house had spent a night proving that nobody had tried to kill anybody, and that she would be putting that in writing. In the valley, we turn the store every quarter moon, I said, and it takes an afternoon. She looked at me for a while. Put that in writing as well, she said, and she meant it, and I did. And it remains the only document I have ever written that a general signed. At the evening table the next night, the steward came forward before the soup, and the room got quiet, a good deal faster than it had the first time. Warren said that the taster had been carried down by something taken in the course of her duty, that the kitchen hand had administered a counter in the presence of the kitchen senior and 2 others, and that the physician had certified the work correct in front of witnesses. The finding stands, said the steward, and this house now owes the remedy 2 lives. He addressed it to the ceiling, because the ceiling is where he addresses everything. Nima was at the table. She stood up, which a taster does not do, and she said in front of 40 people that she would be tasting nothing of his in future, and she sat down again. There was a sound off that hall, like a room full of people deciding at the same moment to say nothing. The taster refusing to taste a man's food is not a compliment. It is the largest thing a taster has to give, and there is no way to give it quietly. Down the table, a woman in gray said, out loud, that a kitchen hand had been in the house 6 days and had 2 of the 6 houses standing behind him. The man beside her told her to keep her voice down, and she said she would not, and she said the number again. Vec did not eat that evening either. He had a bowl in front of him and a spoon beside it, and he put neither of them to any use, and by then it was being noticed by people who were counting. I understood one thing out of that whole evening, and it was the wrong one. I thought Nima had stopped tasting my food because she had decided I was competent, and I was so pleased with myself that I made her something the next day with 3 kinds of pepper in it, just to show off. She ate it without her spoon and told me it was too hot for a human being, and asked for it again the following night. After that, a man from the upper household came down with a thing wrapped in cloth and unwrapped it on my block. It was a cup with stones set into the foot of it, and it was worth more than the village I was born in. A token of the household's regard, he said. I said thank you and asked where I should book it in. Book it in, he said. Everything that comes into a kitchen goes on the store list or you lose it, I said, and nobody has shown me a list for cups. So Halden wrote it into the store list between vinegar and vine leaves in his hand, because mine is bad. By the end of that month, there were 9 entries on that list a jeweler would have wanted, and Halden had opened a second column for them. A man from the upper household went back up and told the evening table that the remedy had entered the queen's grandmother's cup into a list of pickles. 3 people came down over the following week to look at the entry with their own eyes. 2 days later, I mended the general's vambrace with a rivet out of the pantry door and a plate off a broken skimmer, and I did it on the kitchen block with the same file I use on the block itself, and it came out ugly, and it held. Kes turned it over twice. She said it was the worst repair she had ever been given. I said it would outlast the rest of the armor. She put it on, tested the wrist, and said that was probably true, and it was still ugly. Then she started eating in my kitchen, not once. Every evening, on the end of the block, with her boots on the rung of my stool, while the officer's table sat empty of its general 4 floors up. I thought the officer's food had gone bad. I went up and tasted it, and it had, in the sense that it was gray. So I spent a week putting that right. And the officers were delighted, and Kes kept eating in the kitchen. And it took me a very long time to see any problem with my reasoning. On the 9th day, I carried the tray up myself, because the boy who does it had a turned ankle, and the corridor got colder as I went, and the guard on her door looked at the tray instead of at me. She was sitting up with a book she was not reading. The air in that room took the sweat off my face in about a second. Iselle looked at the tray and then at me and asked whether the broth was the same as yesterday. It is, I said, and I can change it, and what would you rather have? That is not a question I am asked, she said. I am asking it, I said. I have a fire and a night, and nothing else to do with either. She thought about it so long that I began to worry about the tray going cold. When I was young, she said, there was a thing made with sour cream and a root that grows under snow, and everyone who knew how to make it has been dead about 1,000 years. I said I would need the name of the root. I do not have one, she said. Then we will be some time, I said, and she laughed, and it came out rusty, like a hinge on an outbuilding. The guard outside the door heard it. I know because he told his watch, and the watch told the barracks, and by the following evening, it had got to the kitchen from the other direction and come back to me as a rumor about somebody else. 4 days after that, Halden put a cleaver through the meat of his own hand, down the side of the thumb where the vessel runs, because he was turning to shout at a boy and the block was wet. It went up the wall. I have seen that once before, on a slaughter day, and the thing you do is not clever, and it is not gentle. You get your thumb into the crook of the arm above it, and you push until the man screams at you, and then you keep pushing, while somebody else finds the cloth. Halden screamed at me. 2 scullions found the cloth. Kess came through the door at the noise with her sword half drawn, and then stood there holding a lamp for the second time in a fortnight, which she pointed out. By the time Vet came down, it was tied off, and the floor had been sanded, and Halden was sitting on a sack being told by a 14-year-old scullion that he had gone the color of dough. The physician looked at the tie and at the arm and asked who had done it. Every person in that kitchen said my name at the same moment. I have not heard that sound before or since, and I had no idea where to put my hands. At the table that evening, Orin came forward. The room did not wait for him to reach his place before it went quiet, and I noticed that because 6 days earlier, it had not gone quiet at all. The house stands owing the remedy 3 lives, said the steward. Vec had been in an excellent humor since dawn, and nobody could account for it. He had come into the hall that morning, folded his hands, and said 89, and 2 of the older stewards had looked at each other, because by any arithmetic anybody in that house could do, it should have been 87. By the 3rd week, the hall had started arriving early for the number, and nobody would admit that was what they were doing. So a great many people found business in that corridor at dawn. Vec came in and said 85, and there was a sound off 40 people that I can only describe as the noise a crowd makes when a wheel does not come off. A steward's clerk did the arithmetic out loud on the stairs twice and got the same wrong answer both times. By breakfast, the whole house knew that the queen had lost 4 days and 7 when she should have lost 7. Captain of the guard called Resic, who liked the sound of himself, said in the guardroom that he would eat his own belt if that number moved the wrong way once more before the moon turned. 2 of his own men wrote it down. I did not know any of this was happening in relation to me. I was busy. A house that size gets through 11 barrels of leaf in a season, and somebody has to strip them. I was not in the room for what follows, and I have it from the queen herself, years after, told in the tone of a woman describing an argument about a fence. Vec came to her before noon with the old book under his arm. This is the best evidence we have ever had, he said. She said what it was evidence of was that she had stopped dying on schedule. The records are kept in 2 columns, he said, carrier and portion. A carrier under the same roof slows the decay while he remains whole. Only the core of him stops it. The arithmetic on the stairs is not an argument against me, he said. It is the first proof in 400 years that I have the right carrier under my roof, and I intend to use him. Have you considered, she said, that you may have the wrong sort of carrier altogether? He said he had considered everything for 4 centuries, and that she was welcome to bring him a better reading of the line. She had no better reading of the line. Nobody in that house did, and that is the thing to hold on to, because it stayed true for a very long time, and it was not stupidity. It was a room full of clever people, all reading one sentence the same way. Then he said the thing she repeated to me twice, with her eyes shut. I will count every morning, he said, and every morning that number stays high will make me more certain and not less. On the 17th day, the steward came into the kitchen and told me the household had reviewed the seating. A man to whom this house stands owing 3 lives cannot correctly be stood against a wall with a jug, said Orin. A stool will be placed at the low end of the hall. You will be seated at it from this evening. I said I did not mind the wall. The wall is not the question, he said. The question is the record, and the record cannot show a house owing 3 lives to a jug. So I sat down at the very end on a stool at a table that runs the length of a room you cannot see the top of. 40 people watched a kitchen hand put his knees under the boards for the first time in 600 years of that house. I thought it was my legs. I had been standing 14 hours a day, and I had said so twice in Oren's hearing, and I spent that entire evening being quietly touched that somebody had listened. Down the hall, a woman in gray said, to nobody, that the boy from the valley was sitting. A man told her to be quiet. She said she had told him a fortnight ago and would not be quiet about it now. The theories started that week, and they were magnificent. Nobody in that house could accept that a man who could not read a wine list kept taking lives off the physician's floor. So they built explanations, and the explanations got better as they got further from the kitchen. The understewards had it that I came from a valley of hidden practitioners who send one boy out into the world each generation. The guard had it that I had been placed there by somebody. The upper household settled on a school with no name in the east, where they teach the old work. Ilka came at me with all of it and a fresh piece of chalk. Which school? She said. I said there was a school in my valley with 11 children in it, and a roof you could see the sky through, and a teacher who had once been to the coast. She wrote down 11 children and roof, and then she looked at what she had written and rubbed it out with the side of her hand, and I could see her deciding that it must be a code. By then, she was at 140 assays. She told me the number as you would tell somebody the time. She had a lamp with her at all hours and a jar of my breath from a Tuesday, and a lock of my hair in wax that she had labeled in 3 places. Nobody had thought to look at my chopping board. I want that understood, because it sounds impossible, and it is not. She had been told to find out what made the boy the medicine. That is what she was told. Everything she did was correct for the question she had been given. On the 27th morning, the physician said 82, and Resik the captain stopped talking about his belt. That afternoon, Ilka took a sample of my hair and a sample of my blood into her study. She shut the door because the draft disturbed her lamp. Then she put both of them into the flame to see what color they went. Hair and blood on a flame in a shut room is a smoke that comes on you slow. She got 2/3 of the way through her note before her hand stopped working. Every spring, the men in my valley burn the brush off the top fields, and every spring, at least one of them stands too long in the wrong wind with his back to the smoke. And what you do about it is not doctoring, and there is no thinking in it at all. You get him out. You get him low. You get water on his face and his neck and his chest. Cold water. From the trough, if the trough is nearer than the beck. And you do not stop, and you do not put him down, and you do not let anyone put a blanket on him. And every child in that valley over the age of about 6 has seen it done at least twice, and could do it tomorrow. I was going past that study with a tray of empty jugs on my hip when I heard a slate go down on the boards inside, and then nothing after it. And the nothing is what turned me round. The door had swelled in the frame. I put my shoulder to it twice, and then I hit it with the tray, and it came in, and the room was gray to the height of my chest, and she was under the desk with her cheek on the boards. She was too heavy and too loose, and I got her over my shoulder wrong, with her arm hanging in front of my face. I went down 4 flights with my hip on the wall the whole way. I remember one thing about those stairs. Somebody was shouting at me to stop, and I did not. There is a trough in the lower yard for the horses. I went into it with her and got her face and her neck under and held her there, and a groom took hold of my collar, and I told him to let go or help, and he helped. She came up on the 3rd time and was sick into the water, and I said that was good. And she said something furious about her slate. I came out of that house at speed. Kes first, with the guard behind her, then 2 of the upper household, then Vec, and the last one out of the door was the queen. And the yard went cold enough that the horses moved. Iselle looked at her sister, sitting in a horse trough, in her good clothes, with the water going down her face. She did not say anything to me at all. She put her hand flat on the top of Ilka's head for about 2 seconds, and then took it away. Vec did what Vec always does. He knelt, he took the wrist and the eye and the breath. He stood up and he said to the yard that the work had been done correctly and that she would keep. Then he asked me why cold water. Because a man full of smoke is hot and stupid, I said, and cold water makes him neither, and everyone knows that. Vec stood in that yard and repeated the words everyone knows that in a voice I did not like at all. Kes had the whole yard for witnesses, and she used them. She named the groom and the 2 upper household men and had them state what they had seen. and she did it standing in the water, in her boots, because she had walked into the trough without noticing. At the table that evening, the steward did not wait for the room to settle. The room settled for him now. Ovin said that the queen's sister had been carried down from the 3rd floor by the remedy and put into cold water in the presence of 6 witnesses of the household, and that no voice was raised against the finding, and that this house owed him 4 lives. Somewhere behind me, a man said the number out loud to somebody who had not been at dinner, and I heard it travel down the hall on its own legs. 4, 4, 4. Vec did not eat. It had stopped being remarkable. What was remarkable was that the queen's sister was not at the table either, and everybody knew where she was, which was on a sack in my kitchen with a blanket round her and a fresh slate. In das gewieden das just lying. Ilka moved into that kitchen and never really moved out. She said the light was better, which was a lie, since it is a cellar. She said the heat helped her hands, which was true and was not the reason. She stopped taking things off me. That was the change, and it took me a month to notice it. She had not asked for a hair or a nail or a jar of breath since the trough. She sat on the sack and wrote down what I did, what kind of onion, and how long in the fat. And did I put the greens in before or after the bones came out? All of it in that hand of hers, on that slate, with the chalk going through it like a nail on a plate. There was a night that week when 2 of the upper household came down for the wine and stood in my kitchen and talked about the queen's sister, as if she were furniture. And one of them said she was a menace with those lamps and would burn the house down. I said she had taken 206 measurements of a man with nothing worth measuring and had not once been rude about it. If she burns the house down, I said, I will carry her out of it again, and you 2 can carry your own selves out. I took the wine and went. Ilka was on the cellar stair the whole time, which I did not know, and she did not come down until they were gone, and she came down and sat on her sack and did not write anything for about an hour. Nima had a second slate by then, and she kept it on a nail behind the flower. I found it once and read as much of it as I could, which was not much, because her hand is worse than mine. She caught me at it. It is a list of things I have eaten because I wanted to, she said. I asked how many were on it. 4, she said. Before this autumn, there were none, and I have been at my work 19 years. Kes came in most evenings and sat on the end of the block and ate whatever was going, and one night she told me she had not been home since the year of the Second River Campaign. I asked what was at home. A house, probably, she said. I have a season of leave standing that I have never taken, 11 times over, and I will take one of them when the queen has no more use for a general. Then she looked into her cup and told me to talk about something else. The queen wanted a thing made with sour cream and a root that grows under snow, and I had nothing to work from but a woman who had eaten it 2,000 years ago and could not name it. So we went at it by elimination, which took most of a month and was the best month I had. I sent her up 7 wrong dishes. She ate every one of them down to the bowl and sent back 1 line each time about why it was wrong, and the lines got longer. The 7th came back with 4 lines on it. Ilka read them out to me off the tray because I read slowly, and then she stopped in the middle and started again from the top because her sister had signed it with her name and not with her title. There was also a rider that month from a house 4 days west who came into the yard on a horse that was finished and asked the steward in the yard, with the grooms listening, whether it was true that this house had the remedy in it. Warren said the household did not discuss its stores in a yard. The rider said he would wait. He waited 11 days, and then he went home, and everybody forgot about him for about a fortnight. The number that morning had been 80. Vex said it, folded his hands, and stood there a moment longer than the protocol required, like a man listening to a note. Then there was Perrin, and I want him on the record, because everybody who tells this leaves the guardsman out of it. He stood the north wall on the coldest night of that autumn, and his relief was late by an hour, and when they brought him in, he was walking and talking, and he had stopped shivering, and the 2 men holding him up thought that was a good sign. I was banking the fire. Kes brought him down because the kitchen was the warmest room, and she wanted him thawed before she went to find out who had been late. A man who has stopped shivering in the cold has run out of the thing that shivers with. You do not put him by a fire, because the fire takes the cold blood out of his arms and sends it into the middle of him and stops his heart in front of you. I got him away from the hearth, which made Kes very angry for about 4 seconds. I got the wet off him. I put him between 2 people under the same blanket and got warm water into him a mouthful at a time for 2 hours until his teeth started up again. Kes sat on the floor with her back against my block and watched the whole thing and did not say a word until his teeth started, and then she said to the ceiling that she had lost 4 men that way in 11 campaigns and had never once been told why. At the table the next evening, Orin came forward. A guardsman of the North Watch has been brought back by the remedy before the kitchen fire, witnessed by his own general, he said. The standing of the house is now 5 lives owed to 1 kitchen hand. Resik, who captains the guard, took off his belt in front of everybody and put it on the table beside his plate. Then he sat and looked at it for a while. Kes told him to eat it or wear it, and the hall made a noise it had not made since I arrived. Vek waited until that noise finished. Then he said, pleasantly, to the top of the table, that he had counted again that morning and would count again tomorrow, and that he had every confidence the number would hold. He was right. It held for 11 more days, and then it stopped moving altogether, and he was the only man in that house who slept well. On the 48th morning, Vek came into the hall, folded his hands, and said 79. A clerk near the door dropped a tally board. 79 was what he had said the week before. A number that goes down is terrible, and a house can live with terrible. A number that stops is something else, and nobody in that hall had a protocol for it, including the steward, and I watched Orin discover that and go gray. Vek let the silence run. Then he said that the household would please not draw conclusions from a single week, and he went out, and 2 of the understewards followed him to draw conclusions at him in the corridor. My own trouble that week was the leaf. We were going through the barrels faster than the store list said we should. A broth wants a great deal of it, and the queen was on broth twice a day. I told Halden we would be short by the turn of the season. Halden said to send for more, so I sent for more, and that is the entire extent of the thought I gave it. 11 barrels became 16. The wagon came up in the rain, and I checked it off myself against the store list under the name the kitchen has always used for it. The princess came 4 days after that, and she came properly, which in that world does not mean politely. It means with enough noise in the yard that the household has to stop what it is holding. Dova of the Western House arrived with 6 guards, 2 wagons, and a soft traveling case she would not let anybody else carry. She came into the great hall without being announced, which the steward has still not forgiven. She was perhaps 25, and she had rings on every finger of her right hand. She stood in front of the queen of the demons with her chin up. My mother is dying, she said, and I have come for the remedy. The hall did the thing halls do. Kes had a hand on her vambrace. Nima had her spoon out of habit. Ilka had chalk on her jaw and her slate against her hip. The queen sat perfectly still while the air went out of the room, and I was at the low end on my stool with a jug I had forgotten I was holding. Iselle asked her how long her mother had. Dova said 40 days, and she said it without her voice moving at all, which I have thought about since, because I could not have said it. Beck stood up. He said that the house had a carrier, that the carrier was whole, and that the Western House would be welcome to the remedy in its season when this house had finished with it, and he looked the length of that hall at me while he said finished. Dova looked down the hall at me too. She looked at me as you look at a sack that has been described to you as a horse. Then she said to the room that she had ridden 4 days to be told she was in a queue behind a kitchen. The steward explained the code to her, and he explained it well, because it is the only subject on which Orin becomes interesting. Nobody takes the core of a person to whom they owe a life. Astas, postdocs, arstai. The Sith's house owes that 1/5, he said. Until the count stands at nothing, the remedy cannot be touched by anybody at all, and that includes a guest, and it includes a princess, and it includes her mother's house. She asked how a kitchen hand came to be owed 5 lives by a royal house. Orin said, in the voice he keeps for linen, that the remedy had been in residence 7 weeks. I did not sleep well that night, because a woman my own age had said 40 days about her mother in a room full of people who were eating, and nobody had put a hand on her. She rode out the next morning to look at the Western Road herself, because she did not believe the road reports. The road reports were correct. The bank above the ford had been rotten since the autumn rain. It went under the second wagon. I have this from her guard captain, who told it 3 times that night to 3 different people, and told it the same way each time, which is how you know a man is not embellishing. The wagon went over sideways and took the horses down with it. Dova was off her own horse and into the water hauling on a trace before her captain had his feet out of the stirrups. There were 2 boys up on that wagon. She got both of them out. She also got a spar of the broken board through the outside of her thigh and did not appear to notice it for some time. They brought her back at dusk on a door. One guard went home that evening on a lame horse to carry word to her mother's house, which left her 5, and I want you to remember that number. Then, the house discovered that nobody in it was going to treat her, and it discovered this slowly, over about 2 hours. In the polite way great houses discover things. Vec said no, and Vec was right, and I am going to be fair to him about this because it is the only way to understand the rest. A physician of one house does not put his hands into a princess of another house. If she lives, it is nothing. If she dies, it is a killing. And 6 houses go to war over a girl with a hole in her leg. Her own surgeon was 4 days west. Her captain would not let a household servant touch her. 2 of the upper households said, in my hearing, that it was very unfortunate and that the western house should not have come without a surgeon, and then they went in to dinner. I did not know any of that. Nobody had told me one word of it. I knew there was a woman on a door in the small hall with a spar of wood in her leg and blood coming out of her at a rate I did not like, and I went and got my things. Her captain put a hand on my chest. The wood is holding it shut, I said, and when the wood moves, she opens. Somebody takes it out on purpose within the hour, or it comes out by itself in the night and she goes in her sleep. What house are you of? He said. The valley, I said, and he took his hand off my chest. I will not pretend I did that beautifully. It took a long time. It went badly twice, and Kes ended up kneeling on the door, holding the leg still, while Nima held the lamp and read me the color of Dova's mouth every minute, like a woman reading a gauge. Dova did not make a sound until the last of it, and then she said a word in a language I do not have, and Kes laughed for the first time since I had known her. I packed it and closed it and tied it, and told her she would keep the leg and would not run on it before the spring. She said she had never run anywhere in her life, at any point, ever. I said she had gone into a ford after 2 wagon boys, and she looked at the ceiling and said that was not running, that was falling with intent. Beck came to the door of that room, somewhere in the middle of it, and stood in the frame with his case in his hand, and did not come in, and he stayed there long enough for the lamp to want trimming. He was not being a coward, he was being correct. He had 500 years of a rule in his head that said his hands do not go into that woman, and he stood in that doorway and watched a 19-year-old cook do it instead. I never once looked up at him. He has not forgiven it, and I would do it again. At the table the next evening, the steward came forward with a piece of paper, which he had never done before, because he wanted the wording exact in front of a foreign house. Foreign said that the princess of the western house had been given up by every physician entitled to touch her, that the remedy had opened, drawn, packed, and closed the wound before 4 witnesses, including her own captain of guard, and that by the code as it stands between all 6 houses, she owed him her life. He said that the standing of the household was now 6 lives owed, and that 6 was the largest number ever entered against a household in the records of all 6 houses, and that he had checked twice. Dova's captain of guard stood up in a hall that was not his, and said that his house did not dispute the finding, and that it would be entered at home. Then he sat down and put his face in his hand for a moment, because he had just handed a rival house a claim on his own princess. The number of women in that hall who had risen for that boy in 7 weeks was now 4. And there was a man in green at the middle of the table who said so, out loud, in the tone of somebody reading out a wager he had lost. Dova sent her 5 guards home 11 days later. She did it in the yard, in the morning, with the grooms and half the household watching, with her stick under her arm, and she told them her mother's house needed men more than she needed an escort in a kitchen. Then she took her soft traveling case, which had been brought 4 days west, specifically so that something could be carried home in it, and she put it down beside my fire, and she sat on it. I thought the guest wing was cold. I spent an afternoon up there with a rod and a rag getting 11 years of jackdaw out of that chimney, and came down black to the elbows and very pleased with myself. The drying flue in the leaf store was the next thing on my own list. There were 4 things on that list, and I got to one of them, and I would like that remembered later on. Dova was on her case by my fire with her leg out, turning a cup in her hands so that the rings went click, click against it, which is a sound I now cannot hear anywhere without turning round. She asked me where I had been. I said, fixing her chimney. She looked at me for a long time. Then she asked whether anybody in my valley had ever hit me on the head with something heavy, and I said only my brother, and she said that would explain a great deal and asked what was in the pot. She never went back to the guest wing. Her case stayed by that fire for the rest of the autumn and became a chair. When a woman of the upper household tried to have it moved for a feast, Dova said one sentence to her that I did not hear, and it had that woman apologizing to a piece of luggage. The queen came to her before that, though, and this I did see because they had it in my kitchen doorway, with me 4 feet away holding a colander. Iselle asked her what her mother was like. Not how long, not what the physicians said, what she was like. Dova stood with her stick and did not answer for a while, and then said that her mother laughed at things that were not funny and had never once been on time. I am sorry, the queen said. If the code let me open my hand, I would open it, and the code does not, and I do not intend to insult a woman of your rank by pretending otherwise. Then she asked whether Dova was warm enough by that fire. Dova said she was. Neither of them looked at me once during any of it, and I stood there with the colander until my arms ached. The physician got to her within the week, which I also did not know, and I have it from Dova, who told me on purpose and much later and watched my face while she did it. Vec sat down on the other side of my fire when I was not in the kitchen. There is one road to the remedy, he told her, and it goes through the count. The code says nothing about how a debt is discharged, only that it must be. Debts can be paid. What exactly are you proposing? She said. A house with a claim before the council of 6 houses has standing, he said, and a physician has none. I have been a physician here 400 years, and I am tired of standing in doorways. Ask the council to read the count strictly, he said, and the count comes apart in your hands. And when it comes apart, there is a remedy, and there is enough of it for 2 dying women, and one of them is yours. Dova said she would think about it. She thought about it for 11 days, and then she came and sat on that case by my fire, and asked me what was in the pot, and I told her, and she did not mention any of it, and I went on chopping. Somewhere in the middle of all this, the queen stopped asking. It was Orin who noticed, because it is Orin's function to notice when a thing that always happens does not happen. Every morning for 2 years, the queen had asked the physician how long she had, before he said the number to the hall, in her own room, privately. That morning, she did not ask him. She asked him whether the Western girl had eaten anything, and then she got up and went to her window, and Vex stood there with the number in his mouth and nowhere to put it. Told the hall anyway. 79. The steward wrote it down, and then the steward went and stood in a corridor by himself for a while. And I know that because I was in that corridor with a jug, and he did not see me. She did not announce it, and she never explained it, and I do not believe she noticed she had done it. The house noticed. It took the house about 4 days to start saying it to each other in the small voice people use for things that might be wonderful. I noticed nothing at all. I was making her the wrong dish for the 11th time. This one had a smoked fish in it, and it came back with a line saying it was closer, which I put on the wall by the fire, and it remains the one thing I have ever pinned up. Stewart nearly died in the long gallery on a Tuesday, and it was the least dramatic thing that has ever happened to anybody. There is a course of stone along the gallery front that had been loose since a storm the year before. It had been reported. The report had gone into the household record, and the record had gone to the steward, who entered it correctly and scheduled the work for the spring. He was walking under it reading a list. I was coming the other way with a basket. I heard the grit come first, which is what comes first. I got 2 handfuls of his collar and went backwards with him on top of me. About a yard of that gallery came down and broke the floor where his feet had been. We lay there in the dust. Orin got up, brushed himself off, checked his list for damage, found none, and said thank you. Then he went absolutely still, and I watched a man arrive at a conclusion he did not want, and he said, in the voice of somebody reading an inventory of table linen, that he was obliged to report the incident to himself. That evening, he came forward at the table and announced that the household steward had been drawn out from under a falling course of stone by the remedy before 2 witnesses of the upper household, and that no voice was raised against it, and that he had verified it against the code himself. The house stands owing the remedy 7 lives, he said, and one of those 7 is my own, and I have entered it in the household record in my own hand. He said it exactly as flatly as all the others. He did not understand for 1 second why the entire hall was making that noise. Vec did not eat that evening. He also did not sleep, and this is the only night in the whole of it that I feel something for him, because at dawn the next morning, he came into the hall with his hands folded and his sleeves down, and he said 80. Nobody moved. A steward's clerk said out loud that yesterday it had been 79 in the flat voice of a man who wants to be corrected. Vec said yes. He said the number had gone up, that it had not gone up in the 2 years he had been keeping it, and that so far as the records of that house went, it had not gone up in the lifetime of anybody in the room. Then he looked down the hall to where I was standing with a jug, and he smiled at me, which he had never done before, and I smiled back, because I thought it was good news. The number went up again on the 69th morning, and it went up by 2. And by then, people were coming in from the stables to hear it. 82, said Vec, and a woman of the upper household put both hands over her mouth, and Resik, who captains the guard, said a word in that hall that a captain does not say in a hall. The house had stopped pretending it was not counting. There were men in that guard room keeping their own tally on the back of a shutter with a nail, in strokes of 4. There was an argument about whether a guardsman is permitted to keep such a tally. It went to the steward, who ruled that he is, provided the shutter is afterwards replaced at his own cost. Nobody could say why. That was the thing. 40 people watched the number climb for a fortnight, and not one of them had an explanation that survived being said out loud, so they built better ones, and the better ones all ended in the same place, which was a valley 2 days east of anywhere. Ilka had 206 assays on that slate by then, and not one of them had ever found anything in me at all. I was a 19-year-old with good teeth and a bad reading hand. She told me so herself, cheerfully sitting on her sack. She said it as if it were a small setback. She did not know that the household had already decided her failure meant the thing was hiding, and that a thing which hides is a thing you have to cut for, and neither did I. And we sat in that warm cellar being pleased with each other. Vec was working harder in those weeks than he had worked in a century, and everybody could see it, and everybody read it wrong. He was not desperate. He was preparing. A physician who has been proved right does not slow down. He clears his bench, and Vec cleared his bench. He was building something that would hold a 2,000-year-old woman steady through a thing that would otherwise have killed her outright. And he was building it well, because he is very good at it. He tested everything on himself. He had done that for 4 centuries and was famous for it in 6 houses. And it is the one sentimental thing about him. On the 72nd night, I went up for the trays that had not come back down, because they never come back down, and there was a light in the still room, and the door was open a hand's width. He was on the floor between the bench and the shelf, with one arm still up on the bench top, where he had gone down holding it, and there was a glass on its side, and nothing spilled out of it, because he had drunk all of it. His chest was not doing anything. I put my hand flat on it and waited, and it did not do anything, and his mouth was open, and his eyes were open, and there was a pulse under his jaw, going about as fast as a man walks uphill. Every valley with a river in it teaches its children one thing before it teaches them their letters, and mine had a river with a mill pond on it, and I was pulled out of that pond myself when I was 5 by a girl, who then went home and did not mention it to anybody. So I did what you do. I got his head back and his jaw up, and I put my mouth over the mouth of the man who had spent 11 weeks asking permission to open my chest, and I breathed into him, and I did it until my head went light, and then I did it some more. He came back on the 8th or 9th breath, with a noise like a boot coming out of mud, and he was sick over both of us. Then he lay there looking at the ceiling, and I sat back on my heels, and we both got our wind. The first thing he said was the name of what he had taken, and the dose, and in a clear voice, twice, so that it would be on the record if he went again. That is who he is. I have not once managed to hate him properly, and that sentence is the reason. The second thing he said, before there was any color back in his face at all, was that I was to ask him nothing. I never have. I did not ask him anything. I got him warm, and I got water into him, and I sat on the still room floor with the Queen's physician between my knees, holding his head up for about an hour, and neither of us said one word in all that time. A guard on the upper round found us at the change of watch. He went for the general because he did not know what else a man does with what he was looking at. Kess came in, took it in, and then did something I have thought about ever since. She stood in that doorway and she called for a second witness before she called for help, because she is a general, and she knew exactly what she had walked into. Not to chasipite or tosinde. I will not be certifying anything, said Vec from the floor. You are not being asked to, said Kess. A man cannot witness himself. I have a guard of the upper round and now a steward's clerk, and under the code that makes 2. He said a word I will not repeat. Kes said that she would enter it as he had said it, and he said, "All right, General," and put his head back down on the boards. At the table, the following evening, the hall filled up early. People who had not come to dinner in a month came to dinner. Orin came forward. He read that the court physician had been found without breath on the still room floor, that the remedy had breathed for him for what the witnesses put at some minutes, that the physician had recovered and had declined to certify, and that the code does not require a debtor's agreement. "The house stands owing the remedy 8 lives," said the steward, "and this evening one of the 8 is the physician's." Vec was at that table. He had come to dinner on purpose. He sat through all of it with his hands in his lap and his face perfectly still, and when Orin finished, he stood up. Everybody expected something. What he said was that the steward had read it correctly, that he thanked the boy, and that he hoped the household would not be so foolish as to imagine that any of this changed a single thing about what was under his ribs. Then he sat down and ate his dinner. All of it. The first meal he had finished in that hall in 11 weeks. And it was the most frightening thing I had ever watched a man do, and I could not have told you why. He said 85 the next morning, with his voice completely steady, and folded his hands afterwards, as he always folded them, and went out to his bench before the hall had finished breathing. The whole of it came apart 4 days after that, and it did not come apart in a hall or before a council or out of anybody's spite. It came apart in my own kitchen over a pot of beans. Dova was on her case by the fire with her leg up and her cup going click, click in her rings, and Ilka was on her sack with the slate, and Nima had come down for the plate I keep back for her, and Halden was doing something loud with the ovens. Dova asked what was in the pot, and I told her. "My mother's kitchens do it with the skin on," she said. I said the skin is where the taste is, and I would show her. Then she said, in exactly the same voice, that it was a shame I would not be there in the spring to show her properly. I said I was not going anywhere, and they would have to carry me out by the ankles. "No," she said, "of course not. I meant afterwards." I asked her what she meant by afterwards, and Dova of the Western House, who had ridden 4 days with a soft case to carry something home in, and who had assumed since the hour she arrived that a person knows what he is, put her cup down on the hearth and looked at me and understood that I did not. Ilka's chalk broke on the slate. Halden did not turn round from the ovens, and did not turn round for the whole of it. Nima put her tasting spoon down flat on the block, which she does not do, because a taster keeps her spoon in her hand. "Otin chi danezerdains," Dova told me. She did it straight in about 6 sentences, because she is not a woman who softens a thing by taking longer over it, and I have not once wished she had done it differently. "Dus binnessins friends." The old records of that house are kept in 2 columns, carrier and portion. There is a line in a hand nobody living writes anymore. Carrier, the one who comes down from the valley. Portion, the heart. They had been looking for a carrier for a very long time, and they had sent men east for 2 years to find one. The valley sends one thing down out of it, and one thing only. I was a boy off that valley who could be had for the asking, so they had me. They told me the truth in the carriage. They called me the remedy from the first day, because that is what I was on the list. The kitchen was extremely quiet. I remember the fat ticking in the pan, and I remember that I turned it down, because it was going to catch, and Ilka made a sound behind me when I did that. "How long have you known?" I said. "Since before you were fetched," said Dova. I asked who knew. "Everybody," she said. I asked whether that included Alsa, who is 14 and does the cold room, and Dova said yes, and I said, well. Then I asked the only thing I actually wanted to know. Would it have worked? "The physician has no doubt whatsoever," said Dova. I said that was something at least. "You want to know what I did about it?" I finished the beans. There were 40 people upstairs who were going to want their dinner, whatever was under my ribs, and the fat was catching, and I have never in my life been able to leave a pan. And then I said the thing that the whole house repeated to each other for a month afterwards, and that a man in green wrote down and read out to people at the western end of the table like a piece of scripture. And I did not mean anything clever by it at all. Well, they could have just asked me. I have to be honest about what came next, or none of what follows is worth listening to. It did not break me. I have thought about why for a long time, and the answer is not a good one. Nobody in that house told me anything about myself over that pot of beans that I had not already believed since I was about 6 years old. I was the boy they sent up the slope in the dark. And that is not a job you give the child you love best. It is the job you give the one the valley can most afford to send. Everybody in a poor place knows the arithmetic of that, and nobody in a poor place says it out loud. And I had carried it around for 13 years the way you carry a stone in a boot you cannot afford to replace. So, when the princess of the Western house told me kindly that I was a thing to be used up for the sake of somebody more important, the feeling that arrived was recognition. It arrived immediately. It shamed me then, and it shames me now. Kes found me in the yard an hour after that, and she had a horse out of the stable with a saddle on it already, and her own cloak rolled up behind the saddle. I can have you on the eastern road inside the hour and past the third house by dawn, she said. I have 11 campaigns behind me, and I know every gate between here and the coast. I will take the consequences, and they will be considerable. Would you be broken for it? I said. Yes, she said. Then no, I said. Do not be a fool, she said. I said I was not being a fool. I was being a person who has to live with himself, and we stood in that yard with a saddled horse between us for a while. Then she took the saddle off. She did not say anything else about it that night or ever, and the horse went back in, and she went up to the barracks and did not eat. Iselle came down to my kitchen at the 11th hour of that night. She had never been in it. 2,000 years in that house, and she had never once been down the cellar stairs, and the cold came in ahead of her the way it always does, and every fire in the room went down and came back. She stood there and looked at the ovens and the block and the barrels of leaf against the wall for a long moment, and then she said my name, not the remedy. Ovin. She had never used it. Nobody in that house had used it in 11 weeks except my mother in letters, and my mother spells it wrong. This house will not take you while I live, she said. I cannot promise you what it does after I stop living, and I came down myself because a thing like this ought not to be sent down 4 flights on a tray. Then she asked me to stay, not the house, not the household. She asked, and she used the word please, which the steward later told me she had not used to a member of that household in his lifetime, and he had been in service under her for 200 years. And here is where I stopped being the boy they sent up the slope. And I want to be clear that nobody noticed it happen, including me, and that it did not look like anything from outside. I said yes, not because I was told to, and not because I could not get out, since there had been a horse in that yard an hour earlier with a general standing beside it. I stayed because I was asked by name, by somebody who had never asked me for anything but what I felt like cooking. Staying was mine to give. Going up that slope in the dark had never once been mine to give. I said I would stay on one condition. The queen of the demons stood in a cellar with flour on the hem of her dress and said, "Name it." "You come and eat at the table in this kitchen," I said, "once in the week at least. I have spent 11 weeks sending food up 4 flights to a woman I cannot see eat it. Half of it comes back cold. I cannot fix what I cannot watch." She stood there and did not answer, and I thought I had gone too far. And then Iselle sat down on the end of my block next to the general's vambrace and said that she would want a stool because she would not be the only one standing in a room where everybody else had one. The house heard about it before the fires were banked. By morning, the upper household had decided it was the largest thing to happen at that court in 800 years. And 2 understewards had a serious quarrel about precedent. The steward came down 4 flights at dawn with a stool under his arm and a face like a man carrying a crown. Oren set the stool down. He checked that it was level. Then he straightened up in a cellar in front of a cook, a taster, a general, a princess of the Western house, and the queen's young sister. "Since the household is assembled," he said, "I am obliged to state the standing. This house stands owing the remedy 8 lives, and the physician's is still one of the 8. The house closed round me like a hand in the days after the beans, and I wanted on the record that for the first week of it, I found the whole business extremely annoying. Kes put 2 of the guard on the cellar stair, and 2 more on the yard door. I said the kitchen had managed without a garrison for 600 years. She said the kitchen had not previously contained anything. Nima went back to tasting my food, all of it, including the water, after she had refused to touch any of it in front of 40 people in her 7th week. "You told the whole hall you would never taste for me again," I said. "This is different, Ovin," she said. I asked how. She knocked her spoon twice on the rim and went on with the bowl. Luca took her sack off the floor and put it against the door so that anybody coming in would have to move a 17-year-old first. She did it every night for a month and never once mentioned it. Dova had her case shifted 18 inches until it sat between me and the stair. She told me she had moved it for the draft. I said the draft comes from the other side. She said then it was for that one. Halden made me a lid. a piece of oven plate with a handle riveted on, and it went over the pot whenever I stepped away from it, and he never once said what it was for. Elsa did the coldest thing anybody did that week, and she is 14, and she does the cold room. She started tasting the salt. Nobody had asked her to, and nobody could talk her out of it. The queen came down for the first of her weekly suppers on the 4th night, and the household nearly came apart at the seams over it. The trouble was where to put everyone. There are 7 of us who eat in that kitchen, and one of us was the oldest living thing in the 6 houses. Ovin had spent 2 days on the question and arrived at nothing. Then, Iselle came down the stairs, looked at the block, and sat on the end of it beside the general's vambrace. Ovin stood behind her with a napkin over his arm for the entire meal in a cellar and would not be talked out of it either. Kes offered him a stool. He thanked her and remained standing. Ilka wrote that down, which tells you what her evening was like. Iselle ate a bowl of barley with mutton fat in it. She ate all of it. Then she asked what the small green thing was. The middle of the leaf out of those barrels in the corner, I said. We do it that way at home. Thank you, Ovin, she said, and asked whether she could have it again on Thursday. Ovin looked at the wall. The queen of the demons had used a kitchen hand's given name in front of the household, and by the end of that week, half the cellar was doing it, and nobody could say who had started. That is the whole of that exchange. It went past every person in the room, including me. Nima wrote it on her second slate under a heading she had invented herself, and the heading was things he eats himself. Vec came to dinner 2 nights later and did the bravest and worst thing I have ever watched a man do, which was to stand up in front of the household and say exactly what he intended. The household has confused a rule with a feeling, he said. The code does not say a debt may not be paid. It says a debt must not be outstanding. And the boss by endation. A house that owes 8 lives does not have 8 misfortunes, he said. It has 8 opportunities. I am going to pay this house's debts, one at a time, lawfully, in front of witnesses. I will begin with my own. When the count stands at nothing, I will come to the queen with a clean record and ask her again. S stood up. The guard will be watching every man you speak to, she said. He said he hoped so, since he would be requiring witnesses in any case, and thanked her for the offer. Then he turned round and looked the length of that hall at me and said he was sorry. I believe he was. It made no difference to one single thing he did afterwards. He came for his own debt 2 mornings later, and he did not come with men or a writ or anything at all from the council. He came down my stairs with a jug. There had been kitchen cough since the rains, and he had made up a tonic against it. He brought it down himself, with the steward and a steward's clerk behind him, because he had told them there would be something to record. Then he poured a measure for himself and drank it in front of us. He put the cup down and folded his hands and waited for the length of about 100 heartbeats while nothing whatever happened to him. That is his method, and it is the reason I can still stand to be in a room with him. He does not hand anybody a thing he has not first taken himself, and he has done that for 400 years, and he did it that morning knowing exactly what came next. Then he poured mine, and it was not the same measure, which I could not have told, and neither could the steward. I drank it because the physician of the house had drunk his first in front of me. There is not a servant in 6 houses who would not have drunk it. I got 4 steps towards the ovens. Then the room came off its hinges, and my legs stopped belonging to me, and I remember the floor arriving and being pleased about how cold it was. After that, there is a gap I cannot fill in. He had me back before Ovin had finished writing down the time. He had the second cup in his other hand when I went down. He had never intended anything else, and he had measured both of them to a hair. I came round with my head in the lap of the man who wants my heart in a dish. The first thing I saw was the steward writing. Ovin said, without looking up, that the incident was witnessed by himself and by his clerk, that the physician had administered and had recovered, and that the code makes no distinction between a danger a man finds and a danger a man is handed, provided it was real. It was real. That is what nobody in the hall could get past. Theodore would not have moved the count, so he had gone as near to killing me as a man can go with a cup, on purpose and correctly. Sat up against the leg of the block and asked him whether I could have the recipe. He stopped folding his instruments. It is very bitter, I said. A little honey would carry it, and the scullions would stop hiding from you. He looked at me for what felt like a long time, and then said he would send it down. He did send it down that afternoon, written out fair in a physician's hand with a physician's measures in it. I put it on the shelf over the block, and I could not read one word of it, and I said nothing about that either. That evening, the steward announced that the physician's debt was discharged before witnesses and that the standing of the house was 7 lives. Nobody made a sound. 7 is a large number. It had never once gone the other way, and 40 people sat there doing the same arithmetic and arriving at the same place, which was the bottom of my stairs. He took Perrin 2 nights after that, off the wall walk, and he did it without breaking anything, which is what people get wrong when they tell it. The rail on the north stretch had been reported loose in the spring, and entered in the household record and scheduled for repair in the spring after. Everybody knew. Nobody had done it. It was the 3rd such entry that year. So Vec asked for the physician's basket to be carried up to the North Tower at the 9th hour, by me, because the physician's basket is carried by whoever the kitchen can spare. Perrine stands that stretch at the 9th hour and has for 2 years. I went over. Perrin had me by the wrist before I was properly gone, and he hung onto the stone with his other hand and swore continuously in a voice I could hear from underneath him, and they got a rope on us in about 4 minutes. 6, said the steward that evening. Perrin was not at dinner. He was in the guardroom being told by Resic that a man who swears like that on a wall should be able to manage it in a hall. Then Orin, and Orin was the neatest of all of them, because the steward's only reflex is to be exactly where the household record says he will be at exactly the minute it says. Vec knew that, and so did everybody else. So the thing happened at the cistern head at 1/4 the hour when the steward crosses the lower yard, and I went into 11 feet of black water with the lid coming down after me. Orin arrived on schedule with a boat hook and had me out in under a minute. Then he stood on the edge, ringing Isadius Kachaquin Sing Buan Mench, and announced to the yard that the steward's debt was discharged and the house stood owing 5. Then he asked whether anybody had seen his list. Halden 2 days later, in the ice house, and the ladder in the ice house had been on the same repair list as the rail. I went down it for a box of birds. It went at the 4th rung and put me on the floor of a stone pit at the temperature they keep birds at, with my ankle wrong and the ladder in 2 pieces on top of me, and I was down there long enough to stop feeling my hands. Halden checks that ice house at the turn of every evening because he does not trust anybody else to shut it properly. He came in, looked down, said something about the box of birds, and had me out by the collar with a rope round the winch post. 4, said the steward. 8 down to 4 in 11 days, lawfully, before witnesses every time, and the physician did not gloat once, which somehow made it worse. I have been asked what that fortnight was like, and I have not found a way of saying it that does not come out ungrateful, so I will put it plainly. Being rescued by people is a warm thing. Being rescued by people who have been arranged into the shape of rescuing you is not. Every one of those men would have come for me anyway. Every one of them knew he had been made to come at an hour of another man's choosing, and afterwards none of them could look at me, and none of them could look at each other. He did not humiliate me in that fortnight. He humiliated Perrin, who has a bad shoulder, and Orin, who had never been late for anything in 200 years, and Halden, who had 30 years in that kitchen. He turned their decency into a sum. The 4 of us used to stand about in the yard afterwards, not talking about it, and I have not since been able to make that yard sound like anything except what it was. Then the women are where it stopped going his way, and he did not see it coming, because nothing in 4 centuries had prepared him for it. He came for Dova on the 11th day, with a stack of casks in the wine store, and he had planned it around her, because a woman with a stick and a hole in her thigh is slow and predictable and stands where she is put. What he had not allowed for is that the wine store belongs to the kitchen. Nobody goes down there alone. The cold room girl carries the lamp because the cold room girl is the one with the free hands. First fall put me on the floor with a cask across my legs. Dova was 4 steps off and coming, stick and all. Then the second fall came down behind me, and it did not come down on me. and it did not come down on her. Elsa is 14. She weighs about as much as a sack of flour, and she was under the end of a stack of oak with her lamp still burning 6 feet away, and she was making a sound I am not going to describe. I got out from under the cask with a shoulder I still cannot lift above my head in the cold. Then I got the stack off her, one at a time, with Dova hauling on the other end of every single one of them on a leg that would not hold her. She came up coughing and furious and asked whether the lamp was all right, because she had carried that lamp for 2 years, and it is hers. I said the lamp was all right. Then I sat down on the floor of the wine store and could not get up for a while. Dova stood in that doorway with her stick in both hands and watched me spend the debt she had been positioned to collect. She did not say anything. She has never once mentioned it since, and I have not once asked her to. Iselle did not send for the physician. She came down to the wine store herself while they were still stacking it, and I was on the floor with my back against a cask and did not get up for any of it. He began to explain the mechanism to her. She let him finish. Then she asked him one question, which was how old the girl was. He said he did not know. She said 14, and that the girl had been in her household since she was 9, and that she had a mother in the laundry and a name, and would the physician like to hear it? He said nothing at all. Iselle said that he would arrange nothing further inside her house. And that the code did not require her to hand him her floors, and that if a thing fell on anybody else in that building, she would consider it his and act accordingly. Then she asked whether he understood her, and made him answer, out loud, in front of 9 people and a girl with wine in her hair. He said he understood her. Orin came forward that evening and announced that the scullion of the cold room had been drawn out from under a fall of casks by the remedy before 2 witnesses, that nobody had contested the finding, and that the house stood owing 5. It had stood at 4 since breakfast. Nobody made the noise the hall had made the other times. 400 people had just heard the physician's method reach down and pick up a child, and the room did the arithmetic on that instead. Kess put 2 of her own on him that night and never took them off. He did not object. He said a physician under watch is a physician, with witnesses standing ready, and thanked her again, and I think by then he was mostly making a noise. It was finished, and he knew it. He could not stage anything in that house anymore, and the count was at 5, and 5 is a long way from nothing when you have run out of floors. So he sent a rider west at the 11th hour of that same night, and it was another 11 days before I learned of it, in the way I learned everything in that house. Orin announced it at the evening table between the fish and the standing, in the voice he keeps for linen, as ordinary household business. The council of the 6 houses has been petitioned by the physician of this house on a question of interpretation, he said. The council will sit in this house before the turn of the season. The household will please prepare rooms for 11. Then he looked at his paper again and said the other thing, and that is the one time I ever heard that man deliver a number as though it weighed something. The house stands owing the remedy 5 lives. 5. And a physician who was not allowed to arrange anything anymore, and the council 4 days up the western road. For about 6 days, nothing happened at all, which was worse. Kess moved into the kitchen, not to eat. She had a pallet brought down and slept across the bottom of my stair with her boots on. The queen told her that a general does not sleep in a cellar. A general sleeps where the thing is, she said, except that the thing is called Ovin, and I would take it kindly if this household started saying so. I did not have a plan in any of this. People have asked me since what I was doing during those weeks, and the honest answer is roots and sauces. I was 19. I had been told I was an ingredient. The only thing I could think to do about that was go on being useful until somebody stopped me. Then the count came off 5 in the most undignified way anything has ever happened in that house, and it happened to me, standing up at my own block with my mouth full. I do not sit down to eat, and I never have. You eat standing at the block between the pans, and you talk while you do it. And one evening in the middle of a sentence about onions, a piece of crackling went down the wrong pipe. There were 4 women in that kitchen, a general of 11 campaigns, a princess of the Western House, the queen's own sister, and the woman who has been poisoned 9 times and lived. Not one of them moved. What I know is that I went down on one knee against the block and could not get anything in or out, and the room went a long way away, and somebody hit me between the shoulder blades hard enough to move my feet. She hit me 4 times. The 4th one did it. Then she went and put the kettle on because she could not think of anything else to do with her hands. Elsa is 14 and does the cold room, and her mother is in the laundry, and she had watched a potboy go the same way at her last place. That is the whole of her method, and it is better than mine. Kes got there second, and Kes is the fastest person I have ever met. She stood behind that girl for a while afterwards, not saying anything, and then she went out to the yard and hit a post. Oren was fetched. He arrived, listened to 4 witnesses, and asked Elsa to state in her own words what she had done. And she said she had hit the remedy in the back of him, and could she have that not written down? He wrote it down. He read it out at dinner in the tone of a man reading an inventory of table linen, and he used the phrase struck him 4 times between the shoulders, and 400 people had to look at their plates. The debt of the scullion of the cold room is discharged, he said, and the house stands owing 4. Elsa cried in the cold room afterwards, and would not say why, and Nima went in and sat with her an hour and came out and would not say why either. Ilka got hers 11 days after that, and she got it on purpose, and nobody in that house had seen it coming. Least of all me. She had stopped studying me in the autumn and started writing down what I did. In the physician's fortnight, she stopped writing down what I did and started writing down what the house was. She had a list. 19 faults reported in that building, entered in the record, scheduled for a spring that had not arrived. The gallery course, the wall walk rail, the ice house ladder. She showed me, and I said that was a great deal of spring. The physician has not broken one thing all fortnight, she said. He is not needed to. A house that repairs nothing will kill you free of charge, and I have worked out which one is next. The plank over the mill leap below the wash house, number 11 on the list. I cross it 4 times a day with a basket because it is the short way to the store, and it had been reported in the summer. So she sat on the leat wall every evening for 4 days with her feet hanging and a rope already round the post beside her, and she told nobody, because she said afterwards that people who are told about a rope stop using the plank. It went on the 4th evening. The wheel had me straight away, and the water under that wheel is not water. It is a machine. And I went round once and hit the sill. She got the rope to me at the 2nd turn. She took the skin off both her palms holding it, and she is 17 and weighs nothing, and she got it round the post and held on with her whole body until 2 of the guard came over the wall. She sat on the flags afterwards, with her hands open in her lap, and told the clerk to write it down properly, and to spell her name as her mother spells it. Then she was sick down the wall and asked whether I was cold. 3, said Oren that evening, and the hall made a noise, and Ilka was not in the hall to hear it, because she was in my kitchen with her hands in a bowl of the bitter stuff, complaining. She has said since that she is the only one of the 5 who chose her moment, arranged her own rope, and put it in writing beforehand, and that this makes hers the best of them. Nobody argues with her about it anymore. The leaf store burned 9 days later, and it was nobody's plan, and I have to take a share of it myself. It is a long, low building against the outer wall, slate roof, 16 barrels, 1 flue for the drying stove at the north end. I had cleaned 11 years of jackdaw out of the guest wing chimney in the autumn, and been very pleased with myself. That flue was the 2nd of the 4 jobs I had written down for myself in the autumn, and I never got to it. And there is no more to say about the cause of that fire than that. It went up at the 9th hour of the evening, with the wind off the north. I was in the yard when it started, and I went in, and there was nobody in there to go in for. I went in for the barrels, because the Queen's supper wants that leaf, and because I had signed for those barrels off a wagon in the rain, and because a man raised in a valley that lives off 1 crop does not stand in a yard and watch a store burn. Kes came in after me about 30 seconds later, shouting. She got me by the belt and the collar and took me out through the doorway with my heels off the ground. I was fighting her the whole way. What I was shouting about was the barrels. She heard me. That is the whole of it, and it is my fault. She put me down on my back in the yard. Then she stood up, looked at the doorway, said 1 word to her own sergeant, and went back in. She went in twice more. She came out the 3rd time, with the last 2 barrels on a handcart, and the roof came down across the doorway behind her, and a burning slate came down with it, and went across the back of her left hand. Vec had that hand dressed in under a minute, and he was very fast and very good, and he did not look at me once while he did it. Then he stood up and washed, and said that the general would keep, and the hand would keep, and she would not thank him for either. She sat on an upturned barrel, with her hand in a cloth and her face gray, and waited until there were 9 people round her, who could count as witnesses. Then she did it by the book. I, per cosa priest in exorans. Valf, the general of the guard, has removed the remedy from a burning store by main force, and against his resistance, before 4 witnesses, she said. I consider my debt to him discharged, and I will enter it myself in the morning under my own hand. Then she asked whether the barrels had taken any water, because there was no point in the whole business if the barrels had taken water. There was a sound off that yard. It was not a cheer. 40 people had watched a woman go into a fire 3 times for a boy who chops roots, and they made a noise about it, and I sat on the cobbles and could not stand up. She filed the report in the morning by the form: time, place, cause, injury, name and rank of every witness, materials recovered. Under materials recovered, she wrote 16 barrels of kitchen greens, none lost. I want that line looked at, because the whole of what was wrong with that house is standing in it. The medicine keeping the queen of the demons alive was burning in a shed. A woman went into a fire 3 times to get it out. It went into the household record under kitchen greens, and it went in correctly because that is what the inventory has called it for 200 years. And every person who read that report read straight past it and thought about the general's hand. Her vambrace would not go over the dressing. That was the thing she minded, and she minded it in the way people mind a small thing when they will not mind the large one. I took the plate off and cut it and moved the rivet and packed the inside with 3 layers of the felt we use under the copper pans. It took me 2 evenings, and it came out uglier than the first repair. She put it on. She flexed the hand inside it. Then she said it was the worst repair she had ever been given, and I said it would outlast the rest of the armor, and she sat down on the block and did not say anything for a quarter of an hour. I asked her about her season of leave. She said not now. I said the hand would be right by the spring, and she said the hand was not the difficulty, and that a general does not go home while a number is falling. And would I please stop asking? Orin said too at the evening table. He said it flatly, as he says everything, and then he stopped, which he never does, and looked at the empty place where a general should have been sitting. Then there was the question of where 16 barrels live when the store they live in has burned down. The cellar is wet, the guest wing is worse, and the only dry room in that building with the floor for it was the great hall, whose tables had been carried out a week earlier to make room for the council. So they stood the barrels along the west wall of the great hall under the windows. Orin entered them in the household record as a temporary disposition of stores and was dissatisfied about it for the rest of his life. They were still standing there 4 days later when 11 men of the council sat down to argue about what was inside my chest, and not one of us looked at them once, and that includes me. Dova came for hers a week after the fire, and she came for it cold, and I have not been able to hold it against her for longer than about a minute at a time. A horse got loose in the lower yard, that is all it was. A horse with something wrong under its saddle blanket, and me crossing that yard with a basket at the hour I always cross it, and Dova standing exactly where a woman with a stick would stand. She got the reins, she got her shoulder into the animal's neck, and took me off the ground with her free hand, and she has a hole through her thigh, and she did it anyway, and the horse put her into the wall, and she did not let go. She named the witnesses herself, in the right order, with their houses attached, which no guest had ever bothered to do in that yard. She stated the discharge in the formal words, and she had clearly learned the formal words in advance. Then she went and sat down by my fire and did not speak for 2 days. I put food in front of her twice a day. She ate all of it and thanked me for none of it. And the 3rd day she said, without any preamble, that she had done it for her mother. I said I knew. Then I asked how her mother was, because I had not asked in a fortnight, and it seemed a poor showing, and Dova put her cup down on the hearth and put both hands over her face, and stayed like that for a while. I did the only thing I know how to do, which was to set a bowl in front of her. She ate it. Afterwards, she told me she had thought I would shout at her. I said I had not been brought up to shout at people who are having a bad month. You are going to get all of us killed, Ovin, she said. I said that seemed unfair, since I had never asked anybody for anything. That is exactly what I mean, she said, and picked her cup back up, and the rings went click against it. And that was the end of the conversation, and the beginning of a great many others. 1, said the steward at dinner. 1, it stood at 1 for 11 days, and every person in that house knew whose it was. Nima had refused to be guarded. She said in front of Kes that a taster who hides is a taster who is not tasting, and that after 19 years, she had not yet found a way to do it from behind a door. The joke of those 11 days, and it was a joke, and the guardroom made it out loud, was that nothing could get near me anymore. The whole house had wrapped itself round me like a hand. A general slept on my stair. A princess sat between me and the door. A 17-year-old had 19 repairs in writing and a rope. Elsa tasted the salt. Nothing in that building was dangerous enough for a taster to be quicker than. I asked her once what she would even do, and she said she did not know, and that this was the first thing in 19 years she had not been able to arrange. Then she said the thing I have thought about most since. A taster is not brave, she said, and is not loyal, and does not love anybody more than she loves anybody else. A taster is a person who has arranged her whole life so that the question never comes up. The spoon goes in first. It goes in first for the queen. It went in first last month for a jug of small beer in a passage, because Elsa was carrying it, and Elsa is 14. After 19 years, I cannot make it not go in first for you, she said, and I will not stand in my own kitchen and start trying. Then she knocked the spoon twice on the rim of the cup. She stopped carrying it in her hand that week and started keeping it in her apron. I noticed and said nothing, because I had learned by then that noticing things out loud in that house made them stop. The council came up the western road on a gray afternoon, with 11 riders and 2 wagons and no banners at all, because the council does not travel as a house. It travels as an instrument. They were housed on the second floor, and they dined apart. They asked for the household record, the physician's record, the code as this house held it, and every finding entered in 11 weeks. And Oren supplied all 4 inside 2 hours, and enjoyed himself more than he had in a century. Their reader was a man called Merrick, who was old as a hinge is old, and who had read the code aloud at 3 successions and 2 wars, and who was nobody's enemy. That took me a long time to accept, and it is true. Iselle received them standing, in the clothes she wears in her own rooms, with the hall undressed. She told them this house had never refused a reading of the code, and would not begin now, and that they were welcome to everything except the kitchen. Marek said the council would require the kitchen. She said the kitchen was working. He said the council would require it anyway. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said that in that case, they could come down at 9 and eat what was going, and Marek said that would be acceptable, and I do not think he knew what he was agreeing to. They came down at 9. 11 men of the council of the 6 houses sat on sacks and stools in a cellar, eating barley with mutton fat in it, and Marek asked what the green in it was. The middle of the leaf out of those barrels in the corner, I said. He said it was very good and asked what else went in. The queen came down at the usual hour. On the day of the week, she always came down, in the clothes she wears in her own rooms with her hair not done, and she crossed a cellar full of the highest body in the 6 houses, and sat on her stool at the end of my block. 11 men stood up with bowls in their hands, because the oldest living thing in the world had come downstairs to eat with a cook, and their own briefing had told them she had not left her floor in 2 years. Marek did not sit down again until she told him to. Then he looked at her for a while and said quietly that the household record had said she was dying. Iselle said the household record was doing its best. Put a bowl in front of her and told her the barley was better than last week because the barrels had come through the fire dry. She said good. Then she ate all of it, and I went back to the pans, very pleased about the barley. The first sitting was called for 9, the next morning in the great hall, with the long tables against the corridor wall and 16 barrels standing under the windows, and Vec got up and stated the question in 9 words. This household stands owing the remedy 1 life, he said. The debt is held by the taster. I am asking the council to read whether it is a debt at all. The council sat for 3 days, and I cooked for it. And somebody ought to appreciate the arithmetic of that, because 11 men of the council and 400 of the household is a great deal of barley. Marek's method was to let everybody talk until they ran out and then read 1 line of the code aloud. The line was always shorter than the argument. By the second day, people had begun to stop before he got to it. Oren was the happiest man in the 6 houses. He had waited 200 years for an occasion with this much procedure in it, and he stood beside 9 tabbed volumes of household record like a man beside a horse he has bred himself. Tess sat at the end of the front bench, with her hand dressed and her vambrace on over the top of it, because she would not be seen in that hall without it. Vec made his argument on the second morning, and it was the best piece of work I have ever watched anybody do. It took him about 4 minutes. I understood every word of it, and that is how I know how good it was. He said the council would agree that a debt under the code is personal, 1-to-1, between the man who was pulled out and the man who pulled. Marek said the council agreed. He said the council would also agree that a debt exists in order to be discharged. Marek said that would depend on what he meant. I spot this. I mean what the code means, said Vec. 3 lawful discharges have been attempted before witnesses, and all 3 have failed, and they failed because the holder of this debt cannot be got behind. She goes in front of the danger by professional reflex, he said. Every time. A debt which by its own nature can never be discharged is not a debt. It is a wall, and the council did not build it and is not obliged to keep it standing. There was a silence in that hall of a particular kind. It is the silence of 400 people who have all noticed the same thing at once and are hoping somebody else will be wrong about it. Then read her out of it, he said, not as a favor, as a reading. The office of taster is an instrument of this house, and an instrument cannot stand as a creditor against the house that holds it. Orin argued against him and argued well. He said the code enters findings in the names of persons, that in 9 volumes there was not one finding entered in the name of an office, and he had 400 years of examples and read out 11. Marek said that was practice and not law. Orin said that in this house, practice had been law for 200 years, and he had the volumes to prove it, and then he stood there with his hand flat on them, breathing. Kes got up next and did not argue law at all. She said she had 11 campaigns behind her and had seen men pulled out by other men in every one, and that nobody afterwards had ever asked whether the man who was pulled out had been on duty at the time. Marek said that was a soldier's answer. She said it was the only kind she had. He said he would enter it, and he did. Then Nima stood up, and she had not been called, and the whole front bench waited for somebody to sit her down. Marek let her stand. I am the holder of the debt, she said, and I suppose I ought to be asked about it before it is taken off me. I went down on the flags of my own kitchen with my mouth full of a bad crock, she said, and I came back up because a boy out of a valley ground a root with the flat of a knife. I have been at this 19 years. I know the difference between an office and a floor. It was me on those flags, she said. The house was upstairs at its dinner. I was on the floor of a kitchen with my mouth burning, and a boy holding my jaw open, and I am the one who came back up off it. Marek let that sit in the hall for a while. Then he asked her one question, and the question was whether she wanted the debt. Then a second one, which was the name of the man she held it against. Since the record does not take a trade and does not take a rank. She said his name is Ovin. Marek wrote it down, and 400 people found out at once that I had one, and I have never worked out what to do with my face on that occasion. She said no. She had wanted it gone, she said, since the morning she understood what it was standing in front of, and that she would give a great deal to be rid of it, and that she would not be rid of it by being called a spoon. He ruled on the 3rd afternoon, and he ruled against the physician, and he took about a minute over it. The council finds that a debt under this code is held by a person and not by an office, he said. It is entered in a name. Every finding in 9 volumes is entered in a name, including this one, and the council will not read a name into an instrument in order to make a house lighter. Then he said the harder half of it. Nobody removes a debt, said Marek. Not this council, not a household, not a sovereign, and not the creditor and not the debtor. A debt closes one way and one way only, and the code has said so for 600 years, and this hearing has not improved on it. The petition of the court physician is refused, he said. The standing of this house is one life, and it will remain one life until somebody discharges it in the manner the code provides. The hall came apart. It was not a cheer either, but it was a great deal closer to one, and Resik, who captains the guard, said a word in that hall that a captain does not say in a hall, for the 2nd time that autumn. Vex sat down. He did not put his head in his hands, and he did not go out. He sat there with his hands folded, while 400 people looked at him, which he had earned and which he took. I did not understand any of it, and I was extremely relieved, and I went down and made a fish for 11 men who had just told a physician he could not have my heart, and it remains the best fish I have ever cooked. Marek sent word down that it was the best thing he had eaten in 6 houses. I sent word back asking whether he wanted the method. He did. Then he sent word back again asking whether the method could be written by somebody else, and I liked him from that moment. We were 3 days from the end of it. The council was to sit once more and go home. Kess told her sergeants they could stand the extra watch down at the turn of the week. And then I killed the whole thing myself, in my own kitchen, out of a jug, with the physician's own recipe in my own hand. The kitchen cough had come back with the wet, and the tonic had worked in the autumn, and the recipe was on the shelf over my block where I had put it, written out fair. I have said already that I read slowly. What I have not said is that I do not read a physician's hand at all, and that his measures are not written in words, and that I had watched him make it once and thought that was enough. There was a mark in that recipe I took for the one he uses on a store list. It is not. It is 4 times that, and any apprentice of his would have known it, and there is no apprentice in a kitchen. I made up a jug of it for the 7 of us, and I tasted it off the spoon before I poured a single cup, because I taste everything I make, and I have since I was 6. It went down very bitter, and I remember thinking that the honey had not carried it after all. And then I remember Halden's face, and then nothing for a long time. I have the rest of it from the room, and the room has told it to me so many times that I can nearly see it, and I am going to give it the way Kess gives it, which is shortest. I went over backwards into the wood store. Nima was 3 feet away with her spoon already out of her apron, because a jug had come off my hands, and she moves before she decides. She got it off the floor, and she smelled it, and she did not taste it. That is what Kess says twice. 19 years, and the one time it mattered, she did not put the spoon in. What she said, according to all 4 of them, and in this order, was, Ovin, do not move, and then a word about the jug that Elsa will not repeat. She knew the smell. She has been poisoned 9 times, and she has kept a list of all 9, and this was the second thing on it, and she had told me its name in the autumn, and I had not written it down because I cannot write. Then she went into the drawer at the end of the store, the one labeled in a hand nobody had read for a long time, and she took out the root that answers it. It had been in that drawer for 200 years, under a label that says it is for horses. I had ground it for her out of that same drawer on the 6th day of my service, and told her it was called root, and she had said root is not a word. She ground it with the flat of a knife. She did it exactly as I had done it, because she had watched me do it from the floor with her mouth burning, and she has never once forgotten anything anybody has ever put in front of her. Then she got it into me with warm water and her thumb on my jaw. Halden held me up. Elsa ran for the physician. Kess stood in the doorway and let nobody through it who was not fetching something. It took a long time. Kess says it took long enough that Ilka went out of the room. Then it stopped taking a long time, and I came up off those flags sick and swearing, which is apparently the exact thing she did. I kind of stasische in the Irichens, wacher wie in the destines by teen. I have been told I swore for a full minute and that it was mostly about the jug. I do not remember any of that. What I remember is opening my eyes and finding the taster of that house 4 inches away, holding my face and looking, absolutely and completely, like a woman who has just lost an argument. Vec came in at the run and stopped. He knelt and took the wrist and the eye and the breath. Then he said, to the room and not to me, that whatever had been done to me had been done right, and that I would keep. Then he asked her what she had used, and she told him. And he said that he had not known that root was in this house, and she said it was in the drawer marked for horses and had been the whole time. He stood there in a kitchen for a while, with his case in his hand. Then he said, "Thank you, taster," and went out, and did not go up to his own floor, but out into the yard. And Perrine says he stood in that yard for an hour. Kess had called for a second witness before she called for help. She is a general. She had known what she was looking at from the doorway, and she hated it. And she did it anyway, and then she went out and hit the same post. Nima made her state it properly. That is the thing I cannot get past. She sat on the floor of my kitchen with my head on a folded apron, and she made a general of the guard read the words back to her twice to be sure of them. Say it as it is, she said. Say that the taster of this house took the remedy out of a poisoning in her own kitchen, before the kitchen senior and the general of the guard and the girl who does the cold room, and that the debt of the taster is discharged. Then she knocked her spoon twice against the rim of the empty cup beside her and put it back in her apron and said, "Well." Orin was fetched out of his bed. He came down in a dressing gown with the 9th volume under his arm, and he did not enter it in the doorway. He came all the way in and stood at the block. He said the finding was witnessed, uncontested, and correct in every particular, and that he was obliged to state the standing before he entered it. The house stands owing the remedy nothing. I had been in that building 11 weeks and 5 days, and I had heard the steward say a number after dinner more often than I had heard my own name. I had never once thought about what the number was for. I understood the whole of it in the time it takes a man to say 2 words. Nima was still sitting on the floor. She knew before any of us. She had known while she was grinding it, and she had done it anyway, and she has told me since that there was never 1 second in which it was a choice. Marek entered it at first light, because a council does not sit on a finding overnight. He entered it correctly, and he looked ill while he did it, and Vec did not smile and did not speak. Then Vec stood up and made his request formally, before the council, with the count at nothing, and he was extremely courteous about it, and he asked for the household's compliance by morning. He also said the truest thing he said in 3 days. He said he had been treating that woman for 400 years, that he had watched the same rot take her mother, and that he was very tired. Iselle had not spoken once in 3 days. She had sat through all of it in a plain chair at the side, which the council had not expected and never quite recovered from. She stood up out of that chair, in front of the council and 400 of her own household, and said no. Marek said that the council had ruled, and that the standing was nothing, and that the code was now satisfied. She said she had heard him, and that she was refusing it. He said, with real distress, that a sovereign who refuses a reading stands outside the code, that a house outside the code is not a house, and that the 6 houses would then be obliged to act. She said she was aware. She had been aware since the morning it became likely, that she had considered it for some weeks, and that the house would take whatever came. Then she said, the only thing she said in that hall that was not about law. I have 2,000 years, she said, and I have spent the last 2 of them being spoken to in numbers by every person in this building, except one, and I will not buy the rest of my life with him. Marek asked her what she was asking for. Morning, she said, in the voice of a woman asking for a jug of water. The code cannot be the worse for being read out loud once more in front of the people it is used on, she said. Sit again at first light in open ceremony, with the record and the old journals carried in and read aloud here, and I will abide by whatever it says once this house has heard it. Said a second reading would change nothing whatever. She said probably not, and sat down and put her hands in her lap. He gave her the morning. He gave it to her because a reader of the code cannot refuse a reading, and he knew that when he said it, and he said it anyway. That is why I have never managed to think of Marek as anything but a decent man in a bad room. Then he instructed the household that the remedy was not to leave the grounds before the ceremony. The guard will hear that instruction from me, or not at all, said Kes from the front bench. Marek said he would enter that too. Everybody came down to the kitchen that night. Nobody said they were coming, and nobody said why. And by the 9th hour, there were 8 of us in that cellar, and not one of us had mentioned the morning. Kes sharpened things she had already sharpened. Ilka sat on her sack with the slate face down across her knees, which she had never once done in 3 months. Dova turned her cup so the rings went click against it. Alsa scrubbed a table that was clean. Nima stood at my shoulder and put things into my hand before I asked for them, which she had learned to do somewhere in the autumn without either of us noticing. Halden roasted a bird meant for the council and told nobody. Oren came down at some point with a jug, put it on the block, and did not enter it anywhere. And I have not seen that man break a rule before or since. I have to say, the ugly thing here or none of that night makes sense. I believed them, not the code and not the council. I believed I was the medicine, because a physician of 4 centuries said so, and a whole household agreed with him, and nobody had ever offered me any other account of myself. So what I was doing in that cellar was arithmetic of my own. A woman of 2,000 years who had asked me to stay and use the word please, set against a boy of 19 who chops roots. Put that way, it is not a hard sum. I did it several times that night, and it came out the same way every time, and every single time I still did not want to die. I have never been able to decide whether that is cowardice. Ilka says it is not. She has said so about 400 times over the years, and I have never once agreed with her out loud, and she keeps saying it, which I think is the point of her. Then the queen came down. She did not say anything about the morning. She sat on her stool at the end of my block between the general and a bag of onions and asked what there was. And I gave her the bird, and she ate it, and Halden nearly wept into a colander. The last thing said in that hall that night was said by the steward, because the household record does not sleep and a standing must be entered every evening whatever else has happened. Oren came into an empty hall with a lamp and opened the 9th volume. He read out to nobody at all that the house stood owing the remedy nothing, and that the last debt in it had been discharged by the taster, correctly, in her own kitchen, at the 11th hour. I was up at 4, because 400 people still want breakfast. On the morning, a house decides whether to open somebody. Halden and I did bread and dripping for the lot of them and sent it up in baskets. The great hall at first light with the tables out has no good place to stand in it. The council sat along the east side. The household filled the rest. The kitchen came up in a body, all 8 of us, and stood at the back by the west wall, where 16 barrels of leaf had been standing since the fire, because there was nowhere else dry to put them. Marek opened it the way he opens everything, by reading the code aloud from the beginning. It took a quarter of an hour. There were people in that hall who had lived under it for 600 years and had never heard it. Then he called for the queen to be seen, because the council had come 4 days for a dying woman and been given a hearing instead, and the record wanted the fact entered. Iselle got out of her chair and walked the length of that hall by herself. No stick, no arm, no chair behind her. She went from the dais to the double doors and turned round and came back, and it took a long time. She had not walked that hall in 2 years. There were people crying. The woman in gray, who had been saying the number out loud at dinner since my first week, sat down on the floor where she stood. And Vec said, into the middle of it, in a voice that carried to the doors, that this was his evidence and not theirs. The council has watched 2 years of rot stop dead within a fortnight of a carrier entering this house, he said. No other cause has been offered to it. My own hand counted every morning of it. You are mistaking the proof of my argument for a refutation of it, he said, and I would like that entered in those words. Iskeme e nesenikor e me ne merhik. Asked whether he still required the core. Vex said he required it more than he had required anything in 4 centuries, because a thing that slows a rot by nearness will stop it altogether used properly. Then he asked leave to read the old journals, and Marek gave it, and he opened the 4th volume at a page whose binding had learned it. He read the line in front of 400 people, including, for the first time in 200 years, the whole staff of that kitchen. Carrier, the one that comes down from the valley. Portion, the heart. He put his hand flat on the page. I have read that line for 4 centuries, he said. I sent men east for 2 years on the strength of it. If any person here has a better reading, I will hear it standing up. Nobody said anything. 400 people and 11 men of the council, and I did not put my hand up, because I had nothing to put it up about. Marek ruled that the reading stood and that the physician might proceed that morning under the code as it now was, in open session, with the record on the table. Then Vec asked for his preparation to be brought in, and nobody who was in that hall has ever needed reminding of what came up the stairs. 4 men carried it up, a sealed copper vessel with a hooped lid on a bar between them and a brazier behind it, and they set the brazier on the flags in the middle of the floor and lit it in front of everybody. It was the thing he had been building since the autumn, and it was not for me. It was to hold a woman of 2,000 years steady through something that would otherwise kill her, and there was one of it. Beside it, on the trestle, he set the finished dose in black glass. The same black glass that had gone up on her tray every evening for 2 years, which I have never touched to this day. Then he said his 2 rules aloud, twice, because that is who he is, and because 400 people were standing round an open flame. It is sealed and it is under pressure, he said. It comes off the heat level and it goes down level. Knock it, drop it, or set it down crooked, and it goes, and it takes everything within 4 yards. Marek asked the household to stand back 4 yards, and it did. The kitchen did not, because we were against the west wall behind the barrels with nowhere to go. Then 4 women did 4 things in about 9 seconds, and I have had 11 years to put them in order, and still cannot swear the order is right. Nima went first, because Nima always goes first. She walked out of the back of that hall, past the guard and past her own general, and picked the black glass up and drank the whole of it standing up. There was 1 dose. She put the empty glass back down on the trestle right way up because she is tidy, and then her legs went and she came down on the flags beside the brazier. Dova came second and came fast. She got 4 steps in on a leg with a hole through it and put her stick through the brazier, and a brazier full of coals went over sideways across the floor. It went under the trestle, which had 9 volumes of record and 4 old journals on it, and the flags of that hall are dressed with rush matting in the autumn, and the matting took it. Kes came third. She went into the coals in her boots, took the sealed vessel off the falling brazier with both arms round it, came up with it against her chest, and stood there. She could not put it down. There was fire on the floor for a yard in every direction, and that vessel must not go down crooked. I watched a general of 11 campaigns work that out in half a second and then stand still and hold it. Ilka came forth and went the other way entirely. She got to the double doors, dropped the bar into the brackets, and broke the key off in the lock with the heel of her hand. 2 men of the council had already started for me. That is why she did it. What she did was seal 400 people, a floor fire, and an unstable vessel into one room, herself included. There was a barrel of leaf at my hip, with the head already off it, standing against the west wall, where the fire had put it 11 days before. So I put my shoulder into it and went it over, and 16 stone of wet green leaf went out across the floor of the great hall in one wave, and took the fire out from under all of it at once. The matting went black and stopped. The coals under the trestle went out with a noise like a kettle. Kes got 2 steps sideways onto cold, wet flags, put the vessel down level, and sat down where she was. Dova was out of the coals with her boots smoking, and somebody had her under both arms. Ilka was on her knees at the door, with her hand opened up on the key. I got Nima onto her side and out of the wet. The fire was gone from round her, and her hands were opening and closing, and that was the whole of what I could do for her. Beck did the rest. He went down on his knees on the flags of his own great hall before the council, in the wet, with his instruments in the leaf, and worked on her for 11 minutes. He had made that dose himself. He knew what was in it and what answers it, and there was not one other living person in that building who did, and everybody understood that at the same moment. She came back swearing. She swore at him and at me and at the ceiling, and it was extremely fluent, and it was mostly about the black glass. Marek had not moved from the east side. When it was clear she would keep, he said, in a voice that got to the back, that the household had that morning seen 4 persons drawn out of a real and present danger to their lives by the remedy before the council itself. These council enters 4 findings, he said. Then he said the rest slowly, because he wanted the physician to hear every part of it. The standing of this house is no longer nothing. It is 4. Nobody in the 6 houses may take the heart of a person to whom they owe their life. 4 persons in this hall owe theirs. Nothing is to be taken from anybody until that count stands at nothing again. Kes said from the floor that she would like her name entered first because she had gone in first. Marek said he would enter them in the order they had acted, and Kes said that was acceptable and lay back down. And that is the whole of how I won it. I did not win it with a secret, and I did not win it with a speech. I put a barrel over. What came next came because I was standing ankle deep in kitchen greens with nothing to do while a council wrote, and a thing I had heard an hour earlier came back and would not sit down. I put my hand up. Marek said the remedy had leave to speak. Halden took the barrel head out of my hands, and I said thank you out loud in the middle of it, because I was brought up in a house where you do. I said I had a question about the store. I asked whether the one that comes down from the valley was meant to be a person, because that was the thing I could not get straight in my head. Marek said that was what the reading held. I said it seemed an odd way to write a person down, since a person has a name and a house, and every other line in that book had one. Then I asked what the rest of the 4th volume was about. Vex said, without any hesitation, and without looking up off the trestle, that the 4th volume of the records is the herbal. He said it flatly and correctly, because it was true and because he had never once thought about it, and Oren the steward lifted his head off his own record like a dog hearing a gate. Wotenches Los Dain Sites. I bent down and picked up a leaf off the floor of the great hall. because there were about 9,000 of them, and they were all over my boots. At home, we call this the valley leaf, I said, and the whole village lives off it, and when you cut one, you throw the outer blade away and keep the pale middle. Then I stripped it the way I have stripped them since I was 6. I threw the blade down on the flags of that great hall and held up the pale middle. This is the heart of it, I said. The rest of a leaf is packing, and at home we throw it at the pigs. Then I said the other thing, and it took about 6 words, and it is the one sentence I have ever said in my life that mattered to anybody. I said I have been putting it in her food since the first week. There was a sound out of that hall I have never heard before or since, and do not have a word for. Somebody at the far end shouted. 2 of the council stood up. Ilka went down on one knee with the slate and started writing on the floor. Vec had not moved. He said, in a voice with nothing in it, that the kitchen has no access to his stores, and that whatever I imagined I had been giving her, it was not the remedy. I said I have never been near your stores. It comes out of the barrels against that wall, 16 of them, that come up from the south twice a year, and I signed for the last 5 myself in the rain. Then Nima said, from the flags, without getting up and without being called, that she had that written down. I have it from my first night in this house, she said, under flavor, because I asked him why he was throwing away the tasty half. Then she was sick again, and Alsa held her head. Oren was already moving. He had the store list open beside the household record and his finger on the entry, and he read it out in the linen voice. The entry stands in the 9th column under broadleaf, he said. Broadleaf has been carried on that list since the list was begun. Current stock is 16 barrels, of which the council is at present standing in 1. Nobody laughed at that either. It was the most useful sentence anybody said in that hall all morning, and the steward has never once understood why it gets quoted. Then Merrick had the 4th volume carried across, put both hands flat on it, and read the line again slowly, out of the herbal, in a room with a barrel on its side in it. And it was not a boy, and had never once been a boy. It was a plant that comes down out of a valley on a wagon, and the heart of it is the pale middle that the people who grow it cut out and use. Vec read it himself, out of his own book, in his own hands. Then he sat down on the edge of the trestle, which is not a thing a physician of 4 centuries does before a council, and said to nobody that the valley sends one thing down out of it. He had said that sentence to me in a corridor in my 2nd week. He had said it as the reason they came for me. Marek ruled inside a minute. The 4th volume is a herbal, he said. The line names a plant and a portion of a plant. No reading of this code can compel the taking of a heart on the authority of a line about greens, and the physician's request falls. Then Ilka got up off the floor, with chalk all down her front, and said the standing was wrong, and that it was wrong by 1, and would the council please look at the slate. She had the whole curve on it. She had the queen's number for every morning since my first, because she had been writing it down before she ever met me, and she put her finger on the 7th morning. The first week is the last week that behaves, she said. After that it slows, then it stops, then it climbs for 11 weeks. And the only thing that entered this house in that first week and never left was a cook and a habit. My sister has been taken out of a real and present danger to her life. They check on daily, without her knowledge and without his, since the first week. If a debt is a debt, then this record is short. Marek asked whether the physician contested it. Vec looked at the slate for a long moment and said the physician did not contest it, and that he had counted every one of those mornings himself and would swear to the figures. So the queen of the demons came down off the dais and stood in front of a kitchen hand in the middle of her own great hall in 4 inches of wet leaf. I owe Ovin my life, she said, and I have owed it since my 100th day, and I would like it entered properly and not politely. Oren had the 9th volume open, and his pen up before she was done, because a steward does not wait for a sovereign to finish. Then he waited for the room and got it. The household stands corrected, he said, in the tone of a man reading an inventory of table linen. This house stands owing the remedy 5 lives. He read the names in order with their houses, and then he read mine, which he had never once had occasion to read before. 5. He said it again for the back of the hall, and the hall said it back to him, and it went down 4 flights the way that number always went. The council rode home 2 days later, and rode home politely. Marek shook my hand in the yard and asked whether I would write out the fish. I said somebody else would have to. He said he had guessed that from the store list. Vec was not broken and not sent away, and I am glad, and I have had arguments about it. The ruling required the correction entered in his own hand in the 4th volume. It took him most of an afternoon, and he let nobody near the page. Then he came down to my kitchen, sat on the sack Ilka used to sit on, opened a fresh book, and asked how much of the middle and how often, and whether it goes in boiled or raw. About a handful for a pot, I said, every day, and you boil it, and you throw the outside away. He asked whether I was certain about the outside. The outside is what makes it bitter, I said, and my mother has been throwing it away for 40 years. He wrote down my mother. He has eaten in that kitchen ever since, and Halden made him. Halden set a bowl in front of him and stood with his arms folded until it was gone, and the physician who had not eaten in that room in 40 years asked what the green was. Kes took her season in the spring. She came back in the autumn to say the house was standing and the roof was not, that she had mended the roof herself, and that it was the worst repair anybody had ever been given. Ilka went east to study, where nobody has heard of her sister. She took 206 essays and a slate with a curve on it, and she writes once a month, and half of it is questions about soup. Dova went home with 4 barrels on a wagon and a method written in a hand that was not mine. Her mother is alive, laughs at things that are not funny, and has still never once been on time. The Western house has not forgiven her, and she has not asked it to. Alsa is 15 now and runs the cold room with 2 boys under her, and she will not have the story about the shoulder blades told in her hearing, and everybody tells it anyway. Nima gave me her spoon. She put it on the block between us and said she was keeping the list and giving up the instrument, and that she had eaten 14 things that year because she wanted to. She eats first now, not by office. She sits down before the rest of us and takes the first of it, and if you say anything she knocks her spoon on the rim, except the spoon is mine now, so she uses a cup. The queen eats in that kitchen twice a week and has never once been on time for it, which I am told she gets from nobody. On the night the council left, I gave her a thing I had been building for 4 months out of sour cream and the root that comes up under snow. It was the 11th attempt, and nobody had tasted it before her, because there was no longer anybody in that house whose job that was. She ate all of it. Then she put the black glass on the block in front of me, the one that had gone up on her tray every evening for 2 years. She said she had no further use for it, and that it would hold about a handful of leaf. I still have that cup, and it stands on the shelf over my block. I keep the middles in it, which is either a very good joke or none at all, and I have not decided which. They still call me the remedy in the record, because the post is entered under that name in the steward's own hand, and Oren will not have it altered. Everybody else calls me Ovin now, which took a council of the 6 houses and a fire to arrange. Oren announced the standing for the last time on the night the council rode out, in a cellar, with a napkin over his arm and the queen of the demons sitting on a stool eating barley. He said the house stood owing the remedy 5, and he read the names, and for the first time in 200 years, the 5th name on that list was the name of the woman he was standing behind. The valley is 2 days east of anywhere, and still lives off 1 leaf on 1 slope, and they still send a boy up in the dark for it. Now a wagon goes down every season and comes back empty and paid, and nobody up there knows why.
This was never about a boy who turned out to be magic. It was about a house that read 1 old line wrong for 4 centuries and built a death sentence on top of it, and about how nobody checked because the line was old, the men reading it were clever, and the answer was standing in the corner in barrels. The physician was right about everything, except what a carrier is. The court was right that the boy was the reason and wrong about which end of him. Be careful what you are certain of. Somebody in the room usually knows already, and nobody has asked them because they are the one holding the pan.